On a calm afternoon on September 19, 2022, the quiet town of Burkesville, Kentucky, became the scene of a shocking crime. Michael Harding, a 53-year-old known for being friendly, had agreed to meet someone at an empty house to fix an air conditioner. But when he stepped inside, unaware of the danger waiting for him, his life took a tragic turn. Julie Harding was born in 1973 and displayed an innocence that defined her from an early age. After graduating from college, Julie applied to the police academy. In 1999, after undergoing rigorous training and evaluation, she officially became a member of the California Highway Patrol. Julie had a deep passion for her job, putting her heart into every task. She was highly regarded by her colleagues and superiors alike. By 2018, after years of hard work, Julie was promoted to captain of the Highway Patrol at the age of 43. Her rising career sparked envy among some, but Julie remained grounded, known for her kindness and compassion. Even with her busy schedule, she actively volunteered in her local community. Julie was also an excellent American football player and took the initiative to organize regular training sessions for the town's youth. However, tragedy struck in 2021 when she was injured while on duty, leading to several surgeries. Despite being bedridden, Julie's spirit remained unbroken, often using a cane to encourage younger crew members in their missions. Once her health improved, Julie resumed her community service, making it a point to appear on the football field weekly. Besides her volunteer work, she loved sharing her professional experiences with others, especially when young people expressed interest in pursuing a law enforcement career. Julie always took time to offer advice and share the challenges and opportunities that came with being a police officer. Her guidance changed many lives for the better, with those who knew her viewing her as a sincere, dedicated, and heroic figure. Julie and her husband shared a seemingly happy marriage, and to many, she was a perfect role model. But behind the image, her dedication to her job led to long periods away in California. Her husband, Michael Harding, was a veteran. He had been married once before and had 2 children with his ex-wife. Together, Michael and Julie lived in the upscale real estate market of California, where Michael ran an air conditioning repair shop in Sacramento. Known for his willingness to help, he often fixed air conditioners for free, earning him the goodwill of the local residents. As time passed, the couple realized that California's high cost of living and heavy tax policies weren't ideal for retirement. They started planning to retire in Tennessee. Michael, with more flexibility in his profession, closed his repair shop in Sacramento and moved first to Tennessee, reopening a heating and air conditioning repair shop in Salina, Tennessee. Within 2 weeks, Michael had a thriving customer base that extended into Kentucky. Michael was well liked in the area, known for his skill and enthusiasm. In his spare time, he enjoyed fishing, which helped him form friendships in the county. He quickly integrated into the community, but the couple's long-distance relationship began to take a toll. Julie would travel back and forth between California and Tennessee to visit Michael, but it wasn't enough to sustain their bond. Friends of the couple noted that their marriage was ending, with divorce proceedings already underway. It was evident that both Julie and Michael were reluctant to give up their jobs and current lives, and as a result, their love had faded over time and distance. They parted ways peacefully, at least on the surface. Michael, in particular, adjusted to the separation quickly, even finding a new girlfriend. Then, something unexpected happened. On September 20th, 2022, Michael, at 53 years old, suddenly went missing. Concerned family and friends notified the authorities and a search began. According to his fishing buddies, Michael had planned to pick up a tuxedo for a wedding where he was to be the best man. However, he mysteriously disappeared en route. A week later, Michael's body was discovered in an empty house for sale in the small town of Burkesville, Kentucky, several miles from his home in Tennessee. A real estate agent, accompanied by 2 potential buyers, had gone to view the property. They were immediately struck by a strange odor, and upon further investigation, found Michael's body. He had been there for days. The authorities determined that Michael had been murdered, as he had multiple gunshot wounds. The house had no apparent connection to either Michael or Julie, and neighbors reported seeing Michael outside inspecting the air conditioning unit before his disappearance. The case was clearly a premeditated murder, but the question remained: who hated Michael enough to kill him? Despite the ongoing divorce, Julie was devastated to learn about Michael's murder. However, she placed her trust in the authorities and didn't fly to Tennessee or visit the crime scene in Kentucky. Instead, she focused on her duties as captain of the California Highway Patrol, turning her pain into resolve. The investigation was complex, spanning California, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Ultimately, on December 8, 2022, after 3 months of thorough investigation, authorities arrested 60-year-old Thomas Francis O'Donnell at Sacramento International Airport in California. Thomas, a native of Napa, California, had a criminal record and had been living in Houston, Texas. His ex-girlfriend had previously filed restraining orders against him for violent behavior, but there was no clear connection between Thomas and Michael. The authorities were still piecing together the motive behind this shocking crime. The most puzzling twist occurred on the same day that Thomas was arrested, when Julie Harding was also detained. She was charged with stalking and trespassing. Surprisingly, it was Michael's new girlfriend who filed the complaint. About 2 weeks after Michael's disappearance and death, his new girlfriend contacted local authorities in Tennessee, accusing Julie of breaking into her home and stealing a dog. The dog, named Charlie, had originally belonged to both Michael and Julie, but had been under Michael's care since their separation. After Michael's death, his girlfriend kept Charlie. The girlfriend reported that she had previously offered Julie the chance to meet at a nearby police station to hand over the dog. However, Julie decided to enter the house without permission and take the dog herself. Frustrated, the girlfriend reported the incident to the authorities. Security footage showed Julie approaching the front door of Michael's girlfriend's home on October 10, 2022, repeatedly calling for Charlie. When she saw the dog, Julie pushed the door open and took him without warning. 3 days later, on October 13th, Michael's girlfriend filed another report stating that she felt stalked by Julie and feared for her safety. She also noticed unauthorized access to her Netflix account with a new profile named Julie added. In response to these 2 complaints, authorities arrested Julie on December 8, 2022, the same day Thomas was taken into custody. However, Julie's arrest was brief, and she was soon released, possibly because no serious harm had been done. But the situation took another shocking turn. On December 10th, just 2 days after her release, a distressing call was made to the police in Vienna, Tennessee. That Saturday morning, at the end of a long driveway leading to a residence, a postal worker discovered the lifeless body of California Highway Patrol Captain Julie Harding, age 49. Julie had been enjoying her vacation at her residence in Tennessee when she was tragically shot and killed in the garage. Authorities conducted a thorough search of the property, and a friend of Michael's revealed that Julie had left a note in the house that simply read, "Michael, I guess you still won." Investigators stated that they found no evidence that Julie was targeted in an attack and suggested the possibility that she chose to end her life with a gunshot. Further investigations were underway. Media outlets echoed the police's perspective, though it was not yet a final conclusion. They declared that the mysterious circumstances surrounding Julie's death were still under investigation. Julie's sudden death cast a veil of mystery over the entire incident. Could it be connected to Michael's case? The police proposed a straightforward theory. Julie had hired a hitman to kill Michael, who was preparing for divorce, and later decided to take her own life before the truth could come to light. Just a week before Michael's death, he had confided to someone during a conversation that he feared his wife might harm him. However, friends and family of both Julie and Michael, including a longtime friend named John, offered a different conclusion. John, who had known Michael for nearly 15 years, believed he understood both Michael and Julie well. He said that many people misinterpreted the real truth behind the situation. John described Michael as the best friend he had ever had in almost 15 years. Michael had been there for him during his lowest moments. They had worked together for many years, and Michael had even encouraged him to start his own business. Whenever John needed help, Michael was always ready to lend a hand. John described Michael as a good person and a loyal friend, but not a good partner. He revealed that Michael had a history of infidelity and had been accused of assaulting an ex-girlfriend. Over time, Michael's life spiraled out of control, and his businesses continuously failed. His financial situation became dire, and although he intended to start anew in Tennessee, he ultimately struggled. Under these desperate circumstances, he turned his attention to his wife, Julie. The couple had once owned 2 properties in California, but Julie sold both at Michael's insistence when they decided to retire to Tennessee. In 2019, with the proceeds, they purchased a lakeside house in Salina, Tennessee, where Julie would eventually meet her tragic end. Despite the deterioration of their relationship, Julie never suspected any hidden motives when Michael asked her to put the house in his name. However, friends of Julie said that in the final year of their marriage, she had uncovered several things about Michael that required legal intervention. News reports indicated that in early October 2021, the police received a distress call from one of Julie's friends in California, concerned that she had lost contact with Julie after she returned to Tennessee. The friend requested a welfare check at Julie and Michael's home. When the police arrived at Julie's door, they were met with a laser pointer aimed at them. It turned out that Michael, who was always on guard, often used the laser to point at individuals who he believed were trying to harass his home. It wasn't until the officers identified themselves as law enforcement that Michael lowered his guard and allowed them into the house to speak with Julie. At the time, Julie assured the officers that everything was fine, and the police left. Fast forward to May 2022, when Julie, having lost faith in her marriage, filed for divorce. 4 months later, Michael vanished. Friends of Julie mentioned that in relation to the dog theft incident, she had tried multiple times to contact Michael's new girlfriend to retrieve the dog, but her requests were always denied. John, the longtime friend, believed that although Julie had every reason to seek revenge on Michael, she would never resort to such extreme measures. He argued that if Julie had wanted to get rid of Michael, she would have done so herself, likely presenting it as self-defense or something similar. He described Julie as highly intelligent and clever, and thought that a reckless approach was out of character for her, especially given her devout Christian beliefs. With both spouses now deceased and few leads available, the police had to refocus their efforts on Michael. Fortunately, they made a significant breakthrough. On December 15, 2022, a grand jury heard evidence of Thomas's involvement in Michael's murder. The judge subsequently approved first-degree murder charges against Thomas and set his bail at $1 million. On December 22nd, Thomas was transferred from Sacramento County Jail. On January 26, 2023, Thomas refused to plead guilty during his first trial. By June 15, 2023, investigators concluded that Michael had likely been murdered, leading the prosecutor to seek the death penalty for Thomas. But what was the evidence revealed by the police? First, there were Julie's suspicious financial withdrawals. Court documents revealed that on March 9, 2022, Julie withdrew $73,000 from the bank without informing her husband. On May 23, 2022, she withdrew $102,000 from another bank, again without Michael's knowledge. The following day, May 24th, Julie withdrew an additional $47,000 from another bank in Salina, Tennessee. After further investigation, they found that in addition to his regularly used cell phone, Thomas had purchased and activated a burner phone on August 29, 2022. This phone was later identified as being used specifically to contact Michael, utilizing the number associated with the vacant house. Furthermore, communication records from the prepaid phone showed that between July 1st and September 8, 2022, there were a total of 194 calls. On September 17th, the records revealed multiple calls from Thomas to a user, whose signal was traced near Julie's residence in California. Consequently, the police believe that Thomas visited Julie's home that day. Additionally, Thomas's cell phone signal indicated that on September 18th, he flew to Nashville, Tennessee. The following day, September 19th, the prepaid phone Thomas used had frequent communication with Julie. Detectives noted that on the day Michael was murdered, Thomas had no direct contact with him. However, on September 19th, Thomas used his prepaid phone to send a text message to Michael, arranging to meet him at a vacant house in Kentucky. That day, at that very property, Michael met his tragic end. It turned out that on September 19th, Michael received a message from Thomas claiming that the house needed air conditioning repairs. Since Michael also planned to visit a clothing store in a nearby Kentucky town that day to pick up his best man's tuxedo, he agreed without much thought. But how did Thomas access the vacant house in Kentucky and pose as the owner? The police explained that it was fairly simple. The property was listed for sale, and to make viewings easier for real estate agents, the seller had installed an electronic lock with a password. A for sale sign in the yard displayed the name of the listing agent, their phone number, and the real estate company's details. Investigations revealed that Thomas had likely scoped out the property earlier in September and targeted it. On September 19th, he visited the house to confirm it was empty. Then he called the real estate company, claiming to be an agent with interested buyers wanting to view the home. Without hesitation, the company gave him the password to the electronic lock. While the case summary may seem straightforward, the detective work to solve it was incredibly intricate. The person who lured Michael to the vacant house used a prepaid phone, leaving no buyer information or verification. So how did the police determine that Thomas was the one making the calls? This was largely due to data analysis conducted by the FBI's technical department. It turned out that once Thomas activated the prepaid phone, he carried it with him at all times. Detectives quickly confirmed that Thomas was indeed the user by comparing the phone's signal with Thomas's known movements. Extensive network data revealed that on August 31, 2022, Thomas visited the Black Hawk Casino in Colorado and checked into the Black Hawk Hotel for 2 nights. The prepaid phone signal was traced to the hotel during that time. Meanwhile, Thomas also visited Tulsa, Oklahoma, to meet a friend, with the phone signal showing up in the same area simultaneously. On September 2nd, Thomas's 2020 Toyota Tundra was spotted at 2:46 p.m. in Kansas, and the phone signal was also detected in that area. On September 3rd, the phone signal was recorded at 9:15 a.m. in Fort Smith, Arkansas. The FBI confirmed that Thomas checked into the Hilton Garden Inn in Fort Smith that day. On September 19th, traffic surveillance captured a Toyota Tundra, believed to be driven by Thomas, passing through Burkesville, Kentucky at 12:55 p.m. Coincidentally, the prepaid phone signal also appeared in Burkesville during the same period. Most importantly, the prepaid phone signal indicated that Thomas stayed at the vacant Kentucky house from 4:49 p.m. on September 19th. 2 months later, on November 29th, FBI agents monitoring Julie noticed Thomas parking his Toyota Tundra in a community service center parking lot near Julie's residence in California. Before parking, Thomas drove back and forth between Julie's house and the parking lot several times, likely to avoid detection. This data suggested that both Thomas and Julie were skilled at counter-surveillance tactics. At least Julie was a clever operator. The phone signal also showed that Thomas was at Julie's house at 12:50 p.m. that day and remained there until 7:40 p.m. These findings were sufficient to prove that Thomas and Julie had some connection, and Thomas's family was aware of it. The police then searched Julie's office, where they found a Valentine's Day card and a birthday card signed with the initials Rab. Thomas's sister later admitted that Rab was a nickname for her brother. Although the police had not fully determined whether Julie was the mastermind, the existing evidence strongly indicated her involvement. Authorities considered Julie's death to be the moment she realized she had no escape and chose to end her life. The lingering question is whether, without direct evidence, Thomas will continue to claim innocence or implicate Julie as the mastermind. This could potentially result in a lighter sentence for him. Reflecting on this case highlights the critical role modern technology plays in solving criminal investigations. What started as a complex case spanning 3 states was cracked with the help of technological advances, even without any direct DNA evidence from the crime scene. But forensic technicians still managed to make breakthroughs, indicating that the cost of committing crimes is rising while the cost of solving them is decreasing thanks to technological progress. Turning back to the couple who journeyed together into the afterlife, their story is nothing short of tragic. Bound by fate, they departed together because of property disputes. Emotions are indeed a significant test of one's emotional intelligence. Although both had intellectual and emotional talents, it ended with the reputation of one killing her husband and harming herself. As for the accused, Thomas, he has yet to reveal his motive for the crime. While the police charged him with first-degree murder and sought the death penalty, without key evidence from Julie, it seems unlikely that Thomas will end up on death row. On the morning of December 2, 1991, in Ecatepec, Mexico, a mariachi returning from his nightly work was walking home, as usual. On his way, he encountered a young boy wandering the street alone. The child was dirty, as if covered in mud, and the mariachi wondered why a child in such a state was alone on the street. He recognized the boy as the youngest son of the Chavez Lopez family, known for having one of the biggest and most spectacular houses in the Jardines de Morelos neighborhood. The mariachi's first question to the boy was why he was dirty and where his mother was. The boy, 3 years old, could walk and talk, but not clearly, making it difficult to understand him. The child seemed calm, likely not understanding what had actually happened, and told the mariachi that a doctor had operated his mother at home. And then she didn't wake up again. This sounded strange to the mariachi, who realized that the boy was not covered in mud, but in blood. What had really happened was beyond the boy's limited understanding of the world, and he couldn't explain what he had witnessed. Confused, the mariachi decided to take the boy to his own home, where his wife was waiting, She knew more about the Chavez Lopez family and knew the boy's name was Alejandro. Shocked by Alejandro's appearance, she and her husband decided to go to Alejandro's house to find out why his parents had left him in such a state. Upon arriving, they noted that the house looked strange. The front door and a patio door were open, suggesting someone was inside, but the curtains were drawn and the lights were off, giving the impression that the family wasn't home or was sleeping. The couple debated entering, but felt uneasy about the vibe of the house. They decided to seek help from another neighbor who lived across from the Chavez Lopez family. By then, the situation had become a scandal among the neighbors, all of whom were wondering what was happening. Yet, none dared to enter the house until the officials arrived. In the meantime, they could only help by cleaning the boy, noticing he had a recent wound under his armpit that had stopped bleeding. Given the dried, darkened blood on the boy, initially mistaken for mud, it was inferred that whatever had happened occurred several hours earlier. Shortly after, a police patrol arrived, and the testimony of the two officers about what they saw inside conveyed the terror they felt each time they thought about it. Upon entering the house, they immediately sensed a heavy atmosphere. The main living area was dark, and no one was visible, so they decided to go upstairs where the bedrooms were located. Hearing the sound of a television in the distance, they headed towards the room it was coming from. They found the door to the room was jammed, not by the lock, but because something was blocking it from the inside. With some effort, they managed to open the door and were horrified to discover the bodies of a man and a woman blocking it. Both were on the floor, one on top of the other, in a blood-soaked room. The officers, unaccustomed to such gruesome scenes and without bullets in their guns, were left speechless and hastily exited the house, visibly shaken. They stood for a few seconds, leaning against their patrol car, and one of the officers called for backup, feeling overwhelmed by the situation. About 20 minutes later, several police patrols arrived, and the officers, equipped with flashlights, began to examine the house. They knew about the two bodies in the upstairs room, but first wanted to check the ground floor for a better understanding of what had happened. To their surprise, the rest of the house appeared orderly, contrary to their expectations of a burglary gone wrong in a high-class family's home. There were no signs of a break-in or a thief searching for valuables. Not finding any abnormalities on the ground floor, and under orders not to disturb the scene before the forensic experts arrived, the officers first examined the room with the TV and the lifeless bodies. The victims were quickly identified as Alejandro and Phoebe Chavez Lopez, the homeowners. The crime scene was indescribable. The knife, the apparent weapon, was used multiple times on the victims, resulting in blood covering the floor, walls, and bed. A shoe print on the bed and the disarray in the room suggested that the Chavez Lopez couple had fought for their lives. Surprisingly, in the room was a bag containing credit cards, checkbooks, and jewelry, indicating that robbery was not the motive. It seemed the crime was driven by hatred towards this specific family, raising the question of who could have done this to such hard-working people, both of whom were school teachers. Everyone spoke highly of the Chavez Lopez family. Alejandro, the father, was an entrepreneurial man. Though a teacher by profession, his passion was business. He was well known in the impoverished neighborhood for his large house, which stood out. He understood the importance of networking for business success, often attending meetings and parties where he made connections with influential people, helping him rise to the top of the community. 33, he already owned 2 large schools, which provided him with a good income, and he had no intention of stopping. Besides teaching, Alejandro's other passion was cars. With his experience in restoring automobiles, he aspired to establish a garage and had already acquired the land for it. Unfortunately, Alejandro could never realize this dream. His wife, Phoebe, was known for her beauty and assisted Alejandro in the administrative aspects of his businesses. She had a daughter, Lorena, from a previous relationship. Lorena, 13 years old and distinct in appearance from her siblings, was treated as Alejandro's own daughter, even taking his surname. The other children, Jasmine, 10 years old, Erica, 8 years old, and Alejandro Jr., 3 years old, were from Phoebe and Alejandro's marriage. Despite the Chavez Lopez house's spectacular exterior, it was poorly designed with an unfinished kitchen and only one bathroom. This was a result of prioritizing the house's facade and luxury cars over practicality. Alejandro liked to maintain a sense of superiority, differentiating himself from others. This trait led people to speculate that envy might have motivated the crime. The family's day began at 4:30 a.m. to accommodate everyone using the single bathroom. Alejandro, not satisfied with the local school standards, sent his children to a school 2 hours away, resulting in much of their day spent in the car. He also avoided mingling with neighbors due to economic disparities, leading to his children being isolated and not playing with other kids in the neighborhood. Alejandro was particularly protective of Lorena, noticing that some older men were trying to woo her, despite her being only 13. Sadly, their end was truly tragic. The crime scene in the main bedroom was shocking, leading the officers to examine the other bedrooms with heavy hearts. The first room they entered, adorned in pastel colors, appeared to belong to Lorena, with clothes and various items scattered around. They noticed a sports shoe without laces and cigarette ashes on the bed, along with a bear-shaped lamp missing its cable. There were no signs of blood or the girls. In the next room, they found a body under the sheets, surrounded by blood. Underneath was Lorena's lifeless body with multiple wounds and hands tied with the shoelaces from the sports shoe in the previous room. The last room, more of a storage area without windows, held the lifeless bodies of Erica and Jasmine, their hands bound with the cable from Lorena's bear-shaped lamp. Alejandro Jr., the 3-year-old, was the sole survivor of this massacre. Due to his young age, he couldn't provide reliable testimony, only repeating that a doctor had operated on his mother. Pressuring him for more information would only cause further psychological harm. At that time in Ecatepec, 9 out of 10 crimes went unpunished, leaving residents frustrated with frequent home invasions, robberies, and threats. However, a crime as horrific as this had never occurred before in the area, causing public outrage. People took to the streets in protest in front of police stations and the courthouse, injured by the lack of progress made by the authorities. The situation was further inflamed by negative newspaper headlines criticizing the police. Adding to the pressure, one of Phoebe's sisters was dating the son of the governor at the time, compelling the police to resolve this crime at any cost. The officers in charge were even threatened with job loss if they failed to solve the case. The police surmised that there were likely multiple assailants involved, as Alejandro was athletically built and his body indicated he had been overpowered. Since no doors or windows were forced open, it was assumed the murderer might have entered through the balcony. The murders occurred between 1 and 3 a.m. Another disturbing detail was that Lorena had been assaulted. The police needed to investigate further the fact that the entire family had attended a party for the daughter of a swimming instructor at one of Alejandro's schools. They left the party around 10 p.m., and a family friend drove Phoebe and the children home since Alejandro continued drinking with a friend at another location. At 11 p.m., Alejandro and his friend entered a bar where they drank large amounts of whiskey and rum. Alejandro attempted to leave with a dancer nicknamed Vicky, but she declined and instead left with his friend. Around 1:30 a.m., the friend and Vicky decided to go to a hotel that first dropped Alejandro at his home. Given the timing, the police began to suspect Vicky and the friend, Salvador Galarza, whose statements were inconsistent. Initially, he claimed he saw Alejandro enter his house, but an investigation revealed that Alejandro having forgotten his keys and being drunk, decided to enter through the balcony. This explained why one of his shoes was found there. Salvador failed to mention that Alejandro had a mistress, who was investigated but seemed unrelated to the crime. After thoroughly investigating Salvador's actions that night, he also appeared not to be the culprit, with his inconsistent testimonies likely due to being extremely drunk. The investigation was exhaustive, with even Phoebe's brother, Doctor, being interrogated, since the child mentioned a doctor operated on his mother. The police explored this lead, along with any other slight clue. They also questioned individuals Alejandro had affected, which were not few in number. For Alejandro, money was paramount, and he didn't hesitate to step on others to achieve his goals. He had recently dismissed several employees from his school without proper severance pay. This issue even reached the courts, but Alejandro won, which many attributed to corruption, as he was acquainted with the judge. Additionally, when constructing the school's swimming pool, he hired an architect but refused to pay after receiving the plans, secretly making copies and having the pool built by other workers. He was also known for stealing business ideas from others in his circle and was infamous for various scams, often not paying when he could get away with it. Lorina's diary revealed that the children were unhappy with the strict lifestyle imposed by their parents. She felt out of place, unable to play with neighborhood kids due to her father's disdain for lower economic classes. She also didn't fit in at her upscale school, where she was mocked for wearing old, outdated clothes and not indulging in luxuries like her classmates. Teachers at the school confirmed Lorina and her sisters were isolated, not mingling with others. This diary entry painted a different picture of Alejandro, contrasting the hard-working image he had cultivated. Despite having the means, he preferred spending on mistresses, alcohol, cars, and maintaining a high-class image, neglecting his children's needs for better clothing and entertainment. Weeks passed without any leads, as there were no security cameras, DNA evidence, or witnesses. Then, on March 17, 1992, the police received an anonymous call from a woman claiming to know the identity of the Chavez Lopez family's murderer, Jose Julio Cipriano Luna, a local metalworker who knew Alejandro. She alleged that the day after the murders, Cipriano stayed near her house, and his clothes, when washed, were covered in blood. In the following days, he was visibly ill, often vomiting. When asked why she delayed reporting this, the woman said she saw Cipriano returning to his old ways and felt it was time. Someone stopped him. She refused further contact, only providing the suspect's supposed address before hanging up. Jose Julio Cipriano Luna, 28 years old, lived in Ecatepec, close to Alejandro's residence. Alejandro, for his automobile restoration projects, required metalworking services, which led him to do business with Cipriano. This connection made Cipriano a person of interest to the police, but they faced a significant hurdle. The anonymous call was not strong enough evidence to incriminate Cipriano, and it was discovered that he lived in another municipality. This posed a jurisdictional issue for the Ecatepec police. At that time, there were no cooperation agreements between police forces, or they required judicial intervention, which could delay the process and risk the suspect fleeing or harming another victim. The only option was to steal the suspect, meaning to detain him in a location outside their jurisdiction for interrogation, hoping for a confession. If they couldn't prove the suspect's culpability immediately, they had to release him. If found guilty, he could then be taken to the appropriate jurisdiction. However, if the local police caught them in the act, their careers could be jeopardized. Despite the risks, on March 20, 1992, 3 officers, Andres Garcia Bomilla, Arturo Martinez, and Ernesto Camarena, decided to carry out this operation in his municipality. They went undercover, avoiding bathing, wearing dirty clothes, and keeping their hair long to blend into the impoverished area. They only had the suspect's name from an anonymous call. Their plan was to inquire about a metalworker near the provided address. However, they soon realized that many in the area were metalworkers. As time was against them, the officers came up with the idea of checking the transparent boxes displaying business permits, which were publicly visible and contained the owner's surnames. In one of these boxes, they found the name Cipriano Luma. When Camarena, who was alone and unarmed at that moment, asked nearby individuals about the metalworker's whereabouts, he received curt and hostile responses, being told that Cipriano no longer worked there and to ask elsewhere. Guided by intuition and the information from the anonymous call that Cipriano lived in his parents' house, the officers eventually found the house and inquired about the metalworker. The officers approached a man who, with suspicion, asked why they were looking for his son. Fortunately, the car the officers were using was damaged, and they managed to convince the man that they needed metalworking services. Believing their story, he informed them that his son, the metalworker, no longer lived there, but was now residing with his mother-in-law. He gave them directions to the new address. After about an hour, the officers located the place. With fewer metalworkers around, they inquired about one and were approached by a man in his mid-20s. Fitting the suspect's description, the challenge now was to get him into the car willingly. Officer Camarena, pretending ignorance about the suspect's identity, fabricated a story about an issue with an engineer to which the suspect, Cipriano, surprisingly admitted he owed money to an engineer and agreed to discuss it in the car. Once in the vehicle, the officers drove to a secluded area to confront him, hoping for a confession. They avoided mentioning the murders initially, engaging in small talk to ease into the conversation. When they reached the isolated spot, Camarena asked the other officers to step away, intending to speak to Cipriano one-on-one without intimidating him. Unsure how to get Cipriano to talk about the case, Camarena showed him a photo of the Chavez Lopez family. Cipriano's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes widened dramatically, betraying his shock. He tried to maintain composure, denying knowing the family. Officer Camarena confronted him directly about his involvement in the crime, leading Cipriano to break down and offer 10 million pesos for his release, claiming the money was at his father's house. Camarena cleverly did not immediately accept or reject the offer but asked for the location of his father's house, confirming it was the same house they had visited earlier. Pressing further about why Cipriano was so eager to bribe him, Cipriano became visibly nervous. Realizing he had trapped Cipriano, Camarena finally got him to confess to committing the crime. The details Cipriano provided about the house, the timing, and the condition of the bodies deeply disturbed Officer Camarena. He had become obsessed with the case, meticulously investigating every aspect, and learning the gruesome specifics from Cipriano turned his stomach. Cipriano also revealed he had 2 accomplices, one of whom had assaulted Lorena. This new information meant that the police now needed more physical evidence to track down the other 2 culprits. During the investigation, Phoebe's sister was asked to check the Chavez Lopez house for missing items. Among the few things stolen were a videocassette recorder and a gold pendant that she had given to Phoebe. These items were later found at Cipriano's house, confirming his involvement. Cipriano confessed the motive behind orchestrating the murders was rooted in his resentment towards Alejandro. Alejandro had hired Cipriano, a humble metalworker, to restore one of his cars. At one point, Alejandro felt that Cipriano was taking too long to finish the job and decided to retrieve his car from the garage without paying Cipriano the owed 600,000 pesos, equivalent roughly $100. Cipriano harbored deep resentment and anger towards Alejandro, who flaunted his wealth yet refused to pay for services rendered. This resentment grew into fantasies of revenge, which materialized when Cipriano met others who also despised Alejandro. One accomplice, Alejandro Cruz, 18, was a street vendor, while the other was Adam Robledo, 20 years old. On December 1, 1991, the day before the murders, the three suspects attended the same party as the Chavez Lopez family. Alejandro was the center of attention at the event, laughing and drinking with his friend. During the night, Cipriano approached Alejandro to ask for the money he was owed, only to be dismissed and told he wouldn't be paid as the job was incomplete. Later that night, Adam, who was infatuated with 13-year-old Lorena, began talking to her. Upon discovering this, Alejandro confronted Adam, berating him and asserting that he had no right to consider himself Lorena's equal or to be near her. Alejandro, tired of the tensions at the party, decided to leave around 10 p.m. Shortly after his departure, a commotion erupted at the party. Adam, who had been pursuing Lorena, was caught with his pants down, assaulting another girl. This scandal quickly spread through the party, resulting in Cipriano, Cruz, and Adam fleeing after stealing kitchen knives for self-defense. Later, as they wandered the neighborhood drunk, they came across Alejandro's house around 2:30 a.m. Cipriano, filled with rage at the sight of Alejandro's wealth and remembering his unpaid debt, decided to take action. Ham, still angry about how Alejandro had treated him earlier, agreed. The third accomplice, Cruz, skilled in picking locks, enabled them to enter the house, leading to the tragic events that unfolded. Adam, exhibiting psychopathic tendencies, even took the time to smoke a cigarette in Lorena's bed after committing the heinous acts. Alejandro, too intoxicated to fight back, was defenseless against the attackers armed with knives. The confessions of the criminals, along with the testimonies of Adam and Cruz, who were quickly apprehended, corroborated the entire story. Each of the three men was sentenced to 250 years in a maximum security prison. The gold pendant found in Cipriano's possession was a critical piece of evidence in the trial. They were confirmed as monstrous individuals, with their confession revealing they hadn't seen any children in the house as they committed the crimes in the dark. This likely spared the life of 3-year-old Alejandro Jr., who was sleeping in his crib at the time. The child later told his grandfather that he had climbed out of his crib, which explained his injury, and unsuccessfully tried to wake his parents before leaving the house. He was eventually found by the mariachi. While Alejandro had made several enemies, the extent of the crime committed by these criminals was far beyond any reasonable retribution for his actions. To end on a positive note, Officer Camarena was recognized and promoted for his work in solving the case, a deserving accolade given the gravity and complexity of the investigation. Maria Cash, the sole daughter in a family of 4 siblings, was a resident of the Barracas neighborhood in Buenos Aires. She was born on December 5, 1981, and enjoyed a blissful childhood with her parents, Federico and Maria del Carmen, along with her brothers Maximo, Patricio, and Santiago. From a tender age, she grasped the significance of friendship when she crossed paths with a girl named Carolina at the age of 6, forging a bond that would endure a lifetime. Subsequently, during their 3rd year of high school, Maria and her best friend Carolina welcomed another addition to their circle, Mariana, who seamlessly became an inseparable part of their group. Maria's social circle was characterized by its quality rather than quantity. Although she maintained amicable relations with her family, she bore the reputation of a rather solitary individual. Even when surrounded by people, she possessed the unique ability to disconnect and revel in solitude. As she matured and gained more independence, whenever she yearned for solitude, she would simply decide to retreat in a coastal city in Argentina known for its pristine beaches, distinctive architectural beauty, and abundant pine forests. Upon arriving, she routinely switched off her cell phone, leaving her friends and family without news of her for several days. Maria developed her talents as a designer and took charge of selling the clothing she crafted. Additionally, She was involved in the sales and promotion of various products. In contrast to her preference for solitude and moments of introspection, Maria displayed a warm and courteous demeanor towards others. Acquaintances frequently remarked on her perpetual smile and serene countenance, making her a delightful presence to be around. Her lively and energetic nature added to her charm. Carolina and Mariana portrayed her as a free spirit with a deep affinity for nature. They emphasized that she lived a modest existence, but consistently extended invitations to dine with her friends and never forgot to mark their birthdays, even if it meant gifting them with a handmade flower. Nevertheless, Carolina also noted Maria's enigmatic side. At some point during her youth, Maria joined a spiritual group, a religious movement centered on self-realization. This pursuit resonated deeply with her, as it provided a platform for meditation exercises aimed at achieving inner peace. While seemingly incongruous to outsiders, this spiritual practice held profound meaning for her, accentuating her inherently spiritual and tranquil disposition. Maria's involvement in the group, along with the enigmatic inner circle she cultivated within the group, remained shrouded in secrecy from her friends and family. Despite its fundamental role in her life, she limited her disclosures to the fact that she dedicated extensive hours to meditation in pursuit of self-awareness. It was within the realms of this group that Maria crossed paths with Juan Pablo, a teacher, proprietor of a restaurant, and government employee in Jujuy. He resided in the picturesque town located 13 kilometers to the north of San Salvador de Jujuy. Over time, Juan Pablo and Maria's friendship deepened to a point where their closeness sparked speculations among both acquaintances and family members. Mariana and Carolina recalled Maria's glowing remarks about him. In late June 2011, Maria confided in her friends, expressing her desire to journey to Jujuy to promote her products, a decision that raised eyebrows, considering the considerable distance and geographical separation from the capital. Maria meticulously orchestrated her trip to Jujuy, veiling the true purpose from everyone, or at least weaving 3 different narratives. She casually mentioned her intention to rest, to sell some of her handmade garments, and even claimed that a friend had extended a job offer at a bar in Jujuy. During a phone call in the presence of her friends, she cryptically mentioned a job opportunity from a Jujuy-based friend without divulging further details. She outlined her plans to depart in July and return to Buenos Aires by December. In the days preceding her journey, Maria convened with her friends for a dinner gathering at Mariana's residence. That night, she shared an overwhelming desire to spread the love of God among people. She carried a Bible brimming with highlighted passages, marking a newfound religiosity, as per Mariana's recollection. In reference to her voyage to Jujuy, Federico Cash, her father, explained that she sought serenity and opted for a destination devoid of the chaos of the capital. She had informed him about a job offer at a friend's bar. On July 4, Maria commenced her journey and at 7:30 p.m. left her home, packing minimally, indicating her intention to be away for just a few days. Her father, Federico, accompanied her to the bus terminal, where she was set to board a bus destined for San Salvador de Jujuy, scheduled to arrive around 6 p.m. the following day. Little did he know that it would be the last time he saw her alive. Somewhere along the journey, an event occurred that remains shrouded in ambiguity to this day, lacking clarity in its entirety. What is unequivocal is that on July 5, Maria made an unexpected decision to disembark in Rosario de la Frontera, a town situated in the province of Salta. This deviation from the plan caught everyone by surprise. In subsequent communications with her family and her friend Juan Pablo, she vaguely alluded to her discomfort with certain fellow passengers, citing an unpleasant experience during the bus ride. However, she refrained from disclosing the true nature of the situation. Standing by the roadside, Maria resorted to hitchhiking and ventured southward until she reached Santiago del Estero. None of these detours aligned with her original itinerary. Nevertheless, after reconnecting with her friend Juan Pablo and disclosing her financial predicament, she resolved to resume her journey. He generously offered to purchase her a bus ticket online, enabling her to continue her voyage to Hugui. Maria eventually arrived in Hugui in the early hours of Wednesday, July 6. During her stay there, she contacted Juan Pablo from a local mechanic's workshop where she had borrowed a phone. Juan Pablo's sister answered the call, informing her that he was occupied with work and couldn't personally pick her up. Instead, she suggested taking a taxi, with the assurance that they would cover the fare upon her arrival. Subsequently, all communication with Maria ceased. When Juan Pablo returned home, he found her absent. At approximately 4:30 a.m., he sent her numerous messages, urging her to either visit her grandmother's house or one of his own restaurants. He provided detailed addresses and insisted on covering the taxi fare, but received neither a response nor her arrival. Around 2 p.m., the young woman was spotted once more, attempting to hitchhike along Route 34. During that afternoon, she conversed with her family, revealing that she had depleted her funds and was feeling unwell, yet she refrained from divulging further details. On the night of July 6, she was captured on video passing through a toll booth. Notably, she was without her suitcase but carried a backpack. Remarkably, the same backpack seen in the footage was discovered by toll booth employees who chose to retain it and eventually handed it over to the police several days later. According to some accounts of the case, on July 7, Maria sought medical attention at a hospital in Salta. However, as the medical examination was about to commence, she opted to depart. Witnesses attested to her appearing disoriented and erratic, as if she lacked a clear sense of direction or purpose. Her overall appearance was somewhat disheveled. Nevertheless, she did manage to consult a pulmonologist in downtown San Salvador de Huy. He charged her 100 pesos for the consultation and prescribed medication for a respiratory issue. In contrast to the descriptions provided by those who encountered her at the hospital, the pulmonologist asserted that she exhibited perfect lucidity, cleanliness, and neatness. These conflicting reports presented a perplexing challenge for investigators. On the same day, July 7, she embarked on a journey to Salta. A truck driver who had previously seen her in Pampa Blanca, Huy, confirmed encountering her while walking along a street in downtown Salta. Another woman also observed her in the vicinity, seemingly in search of a craft store that included a gym on its upper floor. Around 5 p.m., from an internet cafe in that city, Maria sent an email to her brothers, requesting their phone numbers. In the email, she expressed her desire to return to Buenos Aires, citing the loss of her belongings. Regrettably, the communication abruptly terminated, instilling concern within her family. Consequently, they promptly made the decision to report her disappearance, filing a formal complaint at a police station in Salta. Fearing the worst, her father and one of her brothers opted to embark on a car journey to Hugui. Nonetheless, their efforts to locate her proved futile, as she had already moved on from the area. It appears that on July 8th, Maria engaged in an unexpected encounter at the toll booth. She boarded a van driven by a producer and former councilman from the Salta locality. He transported her to the roundabout, where Maria once again solicited a new ride. This time, she succeeded in securing a ride from a truck driver heading to Route 34. Witnesses who encountered her in that vicinity attested to her appearing bewildered and disoriented. She disembarked at a religious pilgrimage site and was spotted in the vicinity of the sanctuary at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Following this moment, all trace of her vanished. Right from the outset, Maria's family pointed out numerous shortcomings in the investigation. For an initial period of 8 months, the case was categorized as a mere disappearance, with the Salta judicial system overseeing the inquiry. However, in early 2012, Maria's father lodged a report suggesting the possibility of human trafficking. Consequently, the case and its investigation were transferred to the federal prosecutor's office in Salta. The investigation proved to be an intricate puzzle due to the abundance of false leads, some motivated by ill intent, and others stemming from genuine concern. Furthermore, Maria's physical description was rather commonplace. A young woman of slender build, average height, with dark hair and eyes. These particulars aligned with the characteristics of countless individuals, resulting in a deluge of incoming calls that ultimately led the investigation astray, as these leads failed to yield any substantive progress. One of the most perplexing aspects that impeded the search was the uncertainty surrounding Maria's intended destination. She underwent 3 transfers across different provinces, introducing an additional layer of complexity. A multitude of lineups, extensive interrogations, consultations, and inspections were conducted, all to no avail. Additionally, 2 extensive search operations were carried out in the region and along Route 34, in an endeavor to eliminate the possibility that she had ventured into the wilderness to spend the night, or alternatively, had fallen victim to a crime along the highway. Speculation even arose that she might have boarded another bus and journeyed to a different region of the country. As the months elapsed, the hypothesis of human trafficking began to wane. Maria's age did not conform to the typical profile sought by human traffickers, who typically target adolescents or significantly younger women. Nevertheless, it was never entirely dismissed, with investigators pivoting their focus toward the potential occurrence of a psychotic episode. Remarkably, in the testimony provided, Maria was portrayed as being poorly dressed, disheveled, and seemingly adrift. She embarked on and disembarked from buses, engaged in hitchhiking, and had even misplaced her identification documents. Contradictorily, Juan Pablo, one of the last individuals to converse with her, recounted that during their telephone exchanges, she exhibited a sense of normalcy, offering no indication of being disconnected from reality or under the influence of substances. There was no discernible sense of fear or urgency in her voice, nor did it seem like she was evading anyone. He emphasized that their conversation flowed like any ordinary exchange between friends. However, he did acknowledge 2 aspects that struck him: her admission of having no money and her decision to head to Hudui without confirming his presence there. He described Maria as an exceptional person, noting that he had never known her to grapple with substance dependencies. He expressed astonishment at her sudden visit to Hudui because they had lost touch for a considerable period, and out of the blue, she called to inform him of her presence there. Simultaneously with the official investigation, Maria's family pursued their search independently. They frequently voiced their frustration with the sluggish pace of the police investigation and the lack of tangible progress. After her disappearance, they engaged in conversations with numerous truck drivers, shopkeepers, neighbors, and law enforcement officers. Across these cities, they disseminated flyers bearing her photograph and contact information for individuals who might possess pertinent information. It was reported that they gathered more than 4,000 leads, yet the overwhelming majority proved to be either false or malicious. Maria's friend, Juan Pablo, also conducted his own inquiries. They combed through police stations, private clinics, public hospitals, and forensic facilities. The police conducted extensive searches and explored numerous theories, yet with time, most of these leads were discounted. Maria's friends even contemplated the possibility that she might have experienced a psychological episode during which she lost self-recognition, track of time, or fell victim to drugging followed by abduction. Nonetheless, these notions remained firmly within the realm of conjecture due to the absence of concrete evidence. Within this context, it is noteworthy that the relentless search conducted by the Cash family did not go unrewarded. While it did not yield Maria's whereabouts, it did lead to the discovery of other women who had fallen prey to criminal organizations engaged in human trafficking. These women had been ensnared in various locations and were ultimately rescued, thanks to the Cash family's endeavors in sharing their stories with the authorities. Amidst this unyielding pursuit, tragedy befell the family once more. In 2014, during one of their numerous journeys across the country in pursuit of any trace or lead, Maria's father tragically lost his life in a traffic accident in La Pampa. He had ventured there to distribute flyers bearing his daughter's visage. Several weeks following his passing, his wife, received the phone call that rekindled her determination, faith, and optimism to continue the fight. Pope Francis extended his condolences for her husband's demise, expressing his heartfelt sorrow. In response, she wrote a letter of gratitude, wherein she conveyed how the Holy Father's compassionate words had filled her heart with love and rekindled the faith and hope that had dwindled from her life nearly 3 years earlier, alongside the disappearance of her daughter. Following Maria's father's tragic passing, his children persisted in their quest to locate Maria. Yet, as is often the case in disappearance investigations, they appeared trapped in a labyrinth, devoid of new leads to guide them. Then, in 2018, a significant development emerged when human remains, including a skull, were discovered in the Bolivian city of Oruro. There was hope that these remains might provide answers about the fate of the young designer, and this possibility garnered extensive media coverage. However, subsequent DNA analysis conclusively ruled out any connection to Maria. The Salta judiciary confirmed that the DNA extracted from the recovered remains did not match that of the Cash family, whose samples had been collected in Salta. Consequently, the mystery surrounding Maria's disappearance persisted, much like it did at the outset of the investigation. In that same year, 2018, a woman named Julia came forward, alleging physical abuse and cruel treatment, and implicating her ex-husband, a prison guard, in Maria's disappearance. She claimed to have witnessed Maria alive and held captive within a human trafficking network, at least until 2013, 2 years after her initial disappearance. Julia's attorney stated that, according to his client's testimony, these women were confined in a piece of land with rented infrastructure. While this lead was diligently pursued, it too failed to yield the discovery of Maria. The subsequent year, in September 2019, as part of this renewed investigative approach, search operations were conducted in an area known as Las Palomitas in Salta, based on information provided by an anonymous witness. Regrettably, these searches produced no results that could advance the investigation. In November 2020, forensic experts released an updated image of Maria Cash, employing age progression techniques. The intention behind this effort was to assist in her potential identification and to prompt new leads. Maria's family expressed hope that this initiative would yield fruitful results. However, once more, these endeavors proved unfruitful. In a succinct recapitulation of the case's progression in 2023, certain Argentine media outlets revisited the topic of Maria's disappearance. They underscored that during the early years of the search, numerous leads were pursued, and a plethora of hypotheses were formulated. However, as time passed, these trails gradually dissipated, and the prospects of locating her dwindled. Nonetheless, the authorities remained steadfast in asserting that the search had never been abandoned. Rosa del Carmen Verduzco was born in 1934 in Zamora, Mexico, into a wealthy and well-positioned family within the community. She and her 4 siblings received a good education due to their status. Money was not a concern for the Verduzcos, but something about this privileged reality troubled Rosa's mind. While she and her family could afford anything they wanted and enjoy a good life, thanks to her father's ability to run commercial businesses, other children faced harsher realities. This seemed unacceptable to her, and from the moment she became aware of it, a compelling need to make a change about the issue that bothered her was born. Even at a young age, she understood that it was up to her to make a difference. However, this task would not be easy, as she came from a strict family, and she knew it well. It was rumored among the inhabitants of Zamora that in her preteens, Rosa had fallen in love with a laborer, and her parents did everything possible to stop the progression of that relationship. At that time, Rosa had no choice but to accept her parents' order to distance herself from that man. Outraged by what she had to endure, she swore she would never marry, but she would have children. One day, while walking through the streets of her city, she met a boy slightly younger than her, who was 13 at the time, living in the open. Rosa felt she could not turn a blind eye and had to remedy the terrible situation the boy was going through, rescuing him from poverty. She took him to live in her house with her family, so he could finally rest under a roof and have a meal on the table. Her parents refused, considering her too young to face such a responsibility, but they eventually agreed to receive him due to her persistence. For time, this activity became a habit for Rosa, or rather, her passion. After a few months, the number of children living under her care had multiplied. Amidst this turmoil in the Verduzco household, her father passed away. Although this terrible event deeply affected Rosa, she saw it as an opportunity to fully pursue her dream. So then, she convinced her mother to buy her a house where she could shelter and help more children. On one hand, Rosa was just as young as her rescued children and also needed adult care, but on the other hand, she would no longer have to occupy her own space. This was how Rosa settled in her first home, but she experienced firsthand what it was like to live without money or food. Far from being an impediment, she went out to walk the streets of the city with the other children to earn their daily food. Her dream was coming true as more and more children arrived at the home under her wing. The shelter began to receive donations from residents and prominent personalities who were moved by Rosa's altruism, allowing her to gather the necessary funds to buy a larger plot of land and build a shelter with much more capacity, the same shelter that years later became known as La Grande Familia. Rosa Verduzco's work was quickly recognized by the population, who were inspired by her commitment and devotion to the care of minors, and consequently, donations soon appeared: food, school supplies, cleaning products, and money, among other things, made it possible to maintain the place that Rosa and her children built with their own hands. In 1947, La Grande Familia opened its doors, but it was in 1973 that the establishment became a civil association, not only receiving street children but also those whose parents could not maintain them due to various difficulties, or who were affected by substance abuse. Keeping them under a roof was one of the objectives, but the priority of the shelter was to provide them with the necessary education to allow them to be professional and independent individuals in the future. For this reason, they had an educational program including primary, secondary, high school, and even university extension careers, recognized and validated by the government. In addition to conventional training, the minors attended physical education classes, sewing workshops, and many more categories. However, one of the most outstanding and proudest for Rosa was musical learning. The children residing in the establishment had to learn to play an instrument or sing. Thanks to this, a large orchestra was formed that did not miss a celebration without presenting their musical number. La Grande Familia gained great popularity, reaching the ears of many politicians who decided to support and get involved in the project. Governors like Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderon, to name a few, became great admirers and allies of Rosa Verduzco. The work carried out there was so recognized that even during a visit by Queen Elizabeth of England to Mexico, she requested to meet Rosa Verduzco, in addition to donating a bus for transporting the children and money to build a gymnasium. Rosa agreed to the meeting, but added a condition to the Queen's request. She was willing to receive her if the children could be present at the venue and share a meal with her and the prince consort, as well as offer them a musical number. Rosa Verduzco made it happen. It was known that with her undeniable determination, she could achieve everything she wanted, and she had already proven it over decades. Thanks to that defining character, over the years, hundreds of children were welcomed into that home. All were received. However, as often happens in such cases, not everyone was very happy with her way of being. Rosa Verduzco faced controversies from the beginning of her project. One of the first reasons she was criticized concerned the location of the shelter, as it was located in an affluent area of the city. Her neighbors were not willing to share space with an establishment that, at first glance, looked deplorable, as it had been built by inexperienced hands, and occasionally some walls would crumble and had to be rebuilt. However, there were more terrifying reasons to judge what happened at La Grande Familia. Amid so much kindness and generosity seemed to hide a secret that only those behind those doors seemed to know, or at least someone that no one dared to tell, for fear of Rosa's reprisals. It was very common among the neighbors of the city to see her in the streets with a group of children. Some were sent to beg for money or sell newspapers to collect money. Meanwhile, others, the more privileged or at least chosen by her, accompanied her to have a chocolate she invited them to. But it was on these occasions that Rosa's authoritarian character became visible to those outside the shelter. In popular celebrations, when the town gathered in the streets, Rosa sent the children to ask for toys and authorized them to bite people who refused to give them anything. On the other hand, merchants or anyone who crossed her path were obligated to make some type of donation that Rosa demanded. The woman had the freedom to do and undo. It was evident that she had a power that exceeded her good intentions of running a home for children. Soon, the inhabitants of the city realized who this popular personality really was. She was greatly admired to the extent that parents threatened their misbehaving children with sending them to Rosa's place, as if that was the worst punishment they could receive. Everyone was aware and divided between those who praised her and those who hated her. However, what seemed unnoticed by the authorities was the actual happenings at the shelter, as no one dared to even visit the place occasionally to ensure it was operating according to governmental regulations. For 60 years, Rosa operated with perpetual impunity, aided by a corrupt system that delegated to one person the work others were incapable of doing. But the truth hidden beneath her kindness and generosity was unmasked in July 2014, after receiving more than 50 complaints from people external to the shelter and survivors of that hell. The Attorney General's Office of the Republic intervened at La Grande Familia to begin an intense search. Families of people who had been through the place and those who had experienced the mistreatments recounted to authorities about extreme conditions of insalubrity, carnal abuses, physical punishments, and deprivation of freedom. During the search at La Grande Familia, the police confirmed the huge amount of spoiled food that was provided to the children, which consequently led to severe cases of malnutrition. Among the testimonies, a survivor recounted being forced to eat flies just to get something in his stomach. Furthermore, other horrifying confessions reported that an endless number of crimes occurred there, threatening the integrity of the children, with numerous cases of abuses perpetrated by the same teachers or caregivers of the shelter. Some stated that within the establishment, there were many pregnant women who, after being forced to give birth, had their children taken away and registered under the Verduzco surname, thereby depriving the mothers of any rights over their babies. Thousands of children were adopted by Rosa Verduzco, despite its illegality, and worse yet, nobody stopped her from committing the crime. On the contrary, it was allowed. What Rosa did next with those children is even more heinous. Having legal custody of the adopted people allowed her to keep them away from their families until they reached adulthood. Whenever their relatives tried to visit them, they were violently expelled from the institution. But later, when they were supposedly able to finally go out into the world as restored individuals, Rosa demanded an exorbitant sum of money in return, as she had authority over them, effectively finding under that excuse a way to traffic people. It was impossible for these families to gather the demanded sum, so some never managed to leave. Moreover, if they tried to escape, they faced brutal beatings and confinement in cells, to the point that one of the victims reported that after a failed escape attempt, Their ears were cut off as punishment. What had once been a shelter had ultimately become a prison. Long list of testimonies exposed the tortures and crimes committed within La Grande Familia. At the time, the Attorney General's office witnessed firsthand the deplorable state of the facilities. Children sleeping in broken bunk beds among trash, rats, and bedbugs, completely dirty bathrooms, and terrible infrastructure. The nauseating odor emanating from the place could be felt from the street, with excrement, urine, and decomposing food revealing the reality that was lived there. It was evident that the place was neglected, and the money from donations was not being used for improvements. These findings cast doubt on the benevolence that had positioned Rosa Verduzco as a legend, a saintly figure in Mexico and the world for decades. Thus, finally, on July 15, 2014, the 81-year-old woman and 6 of her assistants were arrested. Meanwhile, more than 600 people living there, including minors and adults, were rescued from the precarious conditions. Despite all the evidence against her, Rosa Verduzco was released without any charges due to her delicate health condition. The burden of pre-existing illnesses, such as diabetes and heart problems, led to physical and cerebral deterioration, requiring her to be hospitalized. While outside the building, a crowd gathered to pray for her speedy recovery. Others protested against the justice system's decision for not acting in accordance with the reported evidence. Finally, 2 years later, at the age of 84, after being hospitalized again for 20 days, Rosa del Carmen Verduzco passed away due to a sudden stroke. As for the other accused, out of the 6, only 2 were charged with the crimes committed. The others were released just like Rosa. In 2016, 2 years after the discovery of the truth, the Attorney General's office declared itself incompetent to follow up on the investigation into the case, deciding to leave it in the hands of the state. To everyone's surprise, the case remained unresolved, without any resolution, and much less any detainees paying the sentence they deserved for the committed crimes, including deprivation of liberty, the abuse suffered by the children, and the trafficking of them, among other horrific acts. The nickname "The Boss" was not given to Rosa randomly. It was her political contacts who called her that due to her decisive character, her authoritarian personality, and her ability to run a business of such magnitude. What never became clear was how a person with such a strong vocation for service from an early age turned into such a sinister figure, forgetting the true reason why she was there. Some theories suggest that she was involved with Mexican cartels and that La Grande Familia was an ideal place for money laundering. Others believe her ties with politicians personally benefited her, and in exchange for those favors, she forced people to vote for her allies. Indeed, there were those who claimed she was an ambitious woman, extremely strict, who enjoyed others suffering and having control. The reality is that today, the population is divided between those who choose to believe in her good intentions, considering her a saint in life, and those who assert she was one of the most evil people in Mexican history. This contradiction has sparked discussions, even among renowned personalities in culture and politics. What cannot be forgotten is that once again the judicial system has been incapable of providing a certain response to a population that for years hoped the truth would be revealed, and that when it finally happened, nothing changed. Guayaquil, the capital of the Guayas province, is one of the largest cities in Ecuador. Located on a peninsula by the Guayas River, it serves as the country's commercial hub. Known as the gateway to the Pacific beaches and the famous Galapagos Islands, Guayaquil is also a major port and center for imports and exports. It's the second most populated city in Ecuador, after Quito, with a rough estimate of 2.7 million inhabitants. Approximately 400,000 of these residents live in Guasmo Sur, one of the informal neighborhoods in the southern central part of the city. Guasmo Sur is considered the poorest neighborhood in Guayaquil. It struggles with overpopulation, poverty, and frequent criminal activities. Most of its current inhabitants are migrants from rural areas who moved to this urban but isolated part of Guayaquil seeking better employment opportunities and an improved quality of life. The majority of the buildings in Guasmo Sur are made of blocks, yet some houses are constructed with wood, cardboard, and other common materials. The area was named Guasmo because of the once abundant tropical trees of the same name, which were later felled to pave the way for urban development and local industries. In 2018, 19-year-old Kathleen Alexandra Leana resided in Guasmo Sur. Her residence was owned by Ramiro Alta Morando. According to him, it wasn't profitable to rent out one of his ground floor spaces for businesses, as tenants frequently failed and returned the keys. As a result, he decided to remodel the commercial space into a residential apartment. The first tenants arrived on August 9, 2018. A family consisting of a mother and her 4 children, with Kathleen Leana being the oldest daughter. He lived on the upper floor of the same building. Relatives and neighbors of Kathleen Leana described her as a calm girl with no signs of violent tendencies. By October 2018, Kathleen was working because she had applied for a university spot, which she unfortunately did not secure. Less than 5 kilometers away from Guasmo Sur lies Isla Trinitaria, an area crisscrossed by the perimeter road and also plagued with security issues. Isla Trinitaria has a predominantly Afro-descendant population, with many of their homes being built on illegally acquired land and constructed with cement and cane. In Isla Trinitaria, 21-year-old Veronica Jasmine Silva Ruiz lived in the southern part of the main port. Veronica Silva was studying systems engineering at the University of Guayaquil and was about to begin her 2nd semester. She lived with her parents and siblings, being the youngest daughter of Alberto Silva and Maria Ruiz. Many claim that Veronica and Kathleen Leana had been friends since school days, but Veronica's mother was unaware of this relationship and did not know Kathleen. However, it's confirmed that both young women shared 2 things in common. They were neighbors and both knew Herbo Works, a 20-year-old man. Maria Ruiz, Veronica's mother, also didn't know about the alleged romantic relationship her daughter had with Jer, who had also been Kathleen Leana's romantic partner. On the morning of Tuesday, October 2, 2018, Veronica left her home early. By 9 a.m., she bid her parents farewell, heading to the University of Guayaquil. That was the last time they saw her alive. Her mother mentioned that Veronica went to the university without breakfast as she needed to submit a document and intended to return home quickly for lunch. Her father mentioned expecting her home around 11 a.m. When they didn't hear from her, her disappearance was reported to the prosecutor's office on the morning of Wednesday, October 3, 2018. 34 hours after Veronica's departure, her elder sister Rudy received a mysterious friend request on Facebook. A 20-year-old man identified himself as Veronica's boyfriend, claiming he knew of Veronica's whereabouts since his ex-mother-in-law had shown him some of her personal belongings. These items were found in an apartment in Guasmo Sur, which belonged to Kathleen Leana. Rudy informed her parents about this Facebook conversation, and they went to the flagrancy unit of the state prosecutor's office that Wednesday night to report the information. Around 7 p.m., investigators from the National Department of Crimes Against Life, Violent Deaths, Disappearances, Extortion, and Kidnapping confirmed that the body they had discovered dismembered at 2 p.m. that same day matched the family's descriptions. Initially, it was believed that Veronica never went to the university that day, but had been lured to Kathleen Leana's apartment, located 6 blocks from where they found Veronica's dismembered body.
Leana allegedly called Veronica to gossip about her boyfriend, who had previously been Leanna's partner and, according to Leanna, was still secretly seeing her. Later, it was confirmed that Veronica did attend the university on the morning of October 2, 2018, as she had told her parents. This account was
Corroborated by a university professor and later shared with agents from the National Department of Crimes Against Life. Violent deaths, disappearances, extortion, and kidnapping when they were investigating the disappearance. Veronica Silva was last seen at the university with a young woman believed to be Kathleen Leanna and a young man. Their identities could not be confirmed as the faculty's security cameras were offline. By the afternoon of Wednesday, October 13, 2018, Veronica Silva's body was discovered inside 2 black bags placed within plastic boxes on a tricycle in Guasmo Sur. Bystanders, upon discovering the human remains, alerted the authorities. The tricycle was seized for investigation. At 10:30 p.m. on Wednesday, October 3, Kathleen Leanna confessed to the murder. "I cut her in half," she informed the police. Her account of the crime was harrowing. Kathleen claimed she had invited Veronica Silva to her home on Tuesday, October 2, under the pretext of gossip. In reality, she wanted to confront her about the relationship Veronica allegedly had with Kathleen's ex-boyfriend. The two were supposedly still seeing each other secretly, and he had proposed to Veronica. When Veronica tried to leave, Kathleen threatened her with a knife. Kathleen tied Veronica's arms behind her back with plastic and began strangling her with an electrical cord. According to Kathleen, Veronica pleaded to be let go. There were moments Kathleen would relent, only to tighten the cord again. At some point, Veronica attempted to grab a knife, resulting in a struggle on the floor where Kathleen eventually strangled Veronica to death. After the murder, Kathleen tried to dismember the body with a kitchen knife but couldn't sever the head. She attempted to burn the face with alcohol, succeeding only in burning Veronica's hair and face. With family due home soon, Kathleen hid the body beneath her bed, covering it with stuffed animals and sheets. Disturbingly, she slept that night with Veronica's body still under the bed. On Wednesday, October 3, 2018, Kathleen decided to incinerate the body that failed. She placed the body parts in bags and sought out her uncle, Jose Rodriguez, to borrow his work tricycle. Initially hesitant, he eventually lent it to her. When she delayed returning it, he went to look for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Kathleen later told him the tricycle had been stolen, but he discovered from colleagues that the police had confiscated it due to its involvement in a death. Kathleen also admitted to asking a passerby for help loading the heavy bags onto the tricycle. After placing Veronica's remains on the tricycle, Kathleen paid a minor cousin $5 to help her push the tricycle towards a garbage dump, with the boy unaware of the gruesome contents within the bags. 5 blocks away from Kathleen's house, one of the bags fell off the tricycle. Panicking, Kathleen fled when a security guard approached her for littering. Ramiro, the owner of the building where the murder occurred, reported never hearing any alarming noises or cries from upstairs. He only noticed a strong scent, similar to chicken blood. Considering that chickens are frequently slaughtered in the area, he dismissed the smell, not thinking it came from a human body or his own building. In fact, he even considered confronting them about a potential spill, but his wife advised against it. That night, over 10 police officers raided his house. Upon surrendering to the police, Kathleen Leanna claimed she acted alone. However, investigators were suspicious there might be other accomplices. Veronica's mother, Maria Ruiz, also doubted Kathleen's solitary involvement, pointing out her daughter's height and strength. Given Kathleen's story, the primary theory presented by the National Department of Crimes Against Life, violent deaths, disappearances, extortion, and kidnapping, was that of a crime of passion stemming from jealousy. Specifically, it was believed to revolve around a presumed love triangle involving Veronica Silva, Kathleen Leanna, and Jair Alexander. It's noteworthy that Veronica's mother had never heard of these individuals before. Later, Kathleen changed her account, implicating Jair in the crime. She alleged that Jair was prostituting them via a website and participated in Veronica's murder by holding the electrical cord used for strangulation. According to the attorney representing Veronica's family, the young university student was murdered for refusing to engage in prostitution via a website supposedly run by Jair. In September 2019, Kathleen Leana was sentenced to 34 years and 8 months in prison for the murder and dismemberment of Veronica Silva in October 2018. Kathleen's defense appealed the ruling, considering it unjust. In October 2020, an appeal hearing was held, conducted virtually due to the coronavirus pandemic. The presiding judge denied the defense's claims, who now argued Kathleen had only discarded the body, not committed the murder. The verdict against Kathleen Leana included a fine of 1,000 basic salaries to the state and a $20,000 compensation to the victim's mother. During a hearing at the prosecutor's General State Flagrancy Unit, Kathleen Leana's defense requested a psychological evaluation for their client and proposed for transfer to a psychological care institution instead of the Female Social Rehabilitation Center where she had been sent. The forensic clinical psychologist stated that Kathleen might exhibit psychopathic traits and signs of schizophrenia. However, since she acted with clear intent and conscience, she wasn't exempt from legal responsibility. She had meticulously planned everything, showing premeditation and malice when committing the crime. Before becoming the center of attention, Jair told the public prosecutor's office that he had known Kathleen Leana for 3 years and had a romantic relationship with her for 2 years. He mentioned ending the relationship due to her possessive nature, recalling an instance where she threatened him with scissors, warning him not to message any female friends. Jair also reported that on Wednesday, October 3, 2018, Kathleen called him asking if he had a machete. When he inquired about its purpose, she claimed it was to clear some shrubs outside her house. Later that afternoon, he received a message from Kathleen saying she needed to leave as someone was looking to kill her. This was the account Jair shared with the public prosecutor before becoming a prime suspect himself. Not long after, the police sought him out for questioning. Veronica Silva's mother acknowledged that while nothing could bring her daughter back, she took solace in knowing that her daughter's killer would serve a significant sentence for the heinous act. To her, justice had been served. She emphasized the need to apprehend Jair, who was on the run, and also who she believed also had a hand in her daughter's murder. On October 6, 2018, Veronica Silva's funeral was held. Her head was adorned with a white lace crown, making her look like a sleeping maiden. During the funeral, the song Amor Eterno by Juan Gabriel played. Her mother was inconsolable, speaking to Veronica through the glass of the casket, pleading for her to look back. Maria's grief was palpable, screaming as she refused to let go of her daughter. It was a loss she would never overcome, forever scarring her life. Maria repeatedly expressed that her daughter, a calm and peaceful young woman, didn't deserve such a brutal, horrific end. After all, who does? In September 2021, the National Police confirmed the arrest of Jair Alexander Boorks Bastidas. He is believed to be the second individual involved in the murder of his girlfriend. Vicky Glass was born on September 21, 1979, in Stockton-on-Tees, a trading town situated on the banks of the River Tees. At that time, it was part of the extinct county of Cleveland, later reassigned the County of Durham in England. She was the daughter of Deborah and Anthony Glass, and had an older sister named Claire, who was a year older than her. Vicky entered the world prematurely, weighing less than 3.3 pounds, and both her life and her mother's were in danger. Eventually, Vicky's parents separated, and when she was 6 years old, her mother remarried Colin Goodall, a man also living in Stockton-on-Tees. This new union gave the young girl an additional stepsister named Cheryl, who was older than her, and a younger brother named Thomas. From that point on, Vicky lived with them. Vicky had light skin, light brown eyes, and long hair, a look she maintained from childhood into adolescence when she decided to cut her hair. Despite being born with a hearing impairment, music was Vicky's passion, and she considered herself a huge fan of Michael Jackson. Her musical inclination led her to join the local jazz band at a very young age. Clearly, she was a determined young lady. She remained with the group from the ages of 13 to 18, during which time she always enjoyed the trips they took to perform in various places. According to her acquaintances, she felt proud when she performed. Vicky also had a deep love for animals, particularly cats. In fact, she rescued one which she named Sooty. Vicky attended Blakestone High School, also located in Stockton-on-Tees, and had a keen interest in running and sports in general. However, she was very diligent and never neglected her studies. Later on, she secured a job at a local factory in Teesside. While some people who knew her saw Vicky as a quiet and somewhat shy girl, her family and closest friends knew her to be very cheerful. They said she had a heart of gold and was very affectionate. She was indeed a much-loved person who seemingly had everything and lived in a healthy and happy environment. Unfortunately, her life took a dramatic turn when she was nearing her 18th birthday. According to her mother, she began associating with the wrong crowd and started using drugs. The young woman became addicted to heroin and became so dependent on narcotics that she started offering sex services to support her addiction, eventually leading her to leave her home. Over time, Vicky began frequenting the suburbs of Middlesbrough, about 8 kilometers to the east of Stockton-on-Tees, particularly a truck parking lot where transport companies used to park their vehicles overnight. By December 1999, Vicky had developed a chest condition and was homeless. Through a friend, she met a man who lived in Middlesbrough, who offered her shelter while she recovered her health. The homeowner took care of her, and the place became her permanent residence. He assisted her in scheduling her medical appointments and ensured she didn't miss them. Despite the man's efforts to help the girl heal and improve her life, she continued with her addiction to illegal substances and continued offering her services as a sex worker. In the year 2000, Vicky continued with the same lifestyle, and so her 21st birthday arrived on September 21. Unfortunately, the joy quickly turned into tragedy. According to case reports, on that Thursday night, the young woman worked and also celebrated. Apparently, Friday, the 22nd, passed without incident, and by Saturday, the 23rd, Vicky went to her home in the company of a friend to change clothes. Around noon, both of them left the place. Hours later, past midnight, Vicky met with a client on Borough Road, located in the center of Middlesbrough. They then went to 104 Princes Road, a place frequented by drug users and sex workers. She was dressed in a white shirt, light gray pants, and white sneakers. Some time later, the young woman and her client took a taxi down on Union Street and went back to this male's home in Norton, Stockton. After spending some time there, Vicky called a taxi line she often used. The driver picked her up at around 4 a.m. on Sunday, September 24, and about 20 minutes later, he dropped her off in Middlesbrough, specifically at the junction of Union Street and Eshwood Square. This is just to the rear on a pub that was then called the Shipmate. As soon as the taxi driver dropped the woman off at the designated destination, he returned to the headquarters of the taxi company he worked for. That night, and in the following days, Vicky did not return to her house. Her friend, the man who had helped her when she needed it most, became worried as her absence prolonged. He started asking about her at all the places she frequented. Since no one could provide information about her whereabouts, he decided to contact the police to report her as missing. In the same month, a man named Sean Tooley was arrested. His arrest was related to the asphyxiation death of a 20-year-old woman named Kelly Mallinson, who also engaged in sex work to finance her addiction and frequented the same places Vicky did. Tooley was sentenced to life in prison a year later. On Friday, November 3, 6 weeks after Vicky's disappearance, a man who was walking dogs made a gruesome discovery on a trail in the town of Danby, a picturesque village located in the North Yorkshire. Around 6 in the morning, the man came across the naked and decomposed corpse of a woman. Immediately, amidst his shock, the citizen notified the police. The remains were taken to the coroner's office, where experts determined that it was Vicky. Due to the state of the remains, pathologists concluded that she had been exposed to the moorland winds for several weeks. Although they couldn't establish the cause of her death, they stated that there appeared to be no wounds and no signs of abuse, sexual or otherwise, nor any indication that she had died from drowning. Officials who arrived at the scene searched the area surrounding where Vicky's body was found for clues and tried to locate the victim's clothing, but their efforts yielded no results. Cleveland and North Yorkshire police officers initiated investigations. A team of 40 officers tried to reconstruct the unfortunate young woman's last steps during the night of September 23 and the early hours of September 24. They interviewed both the taxi driver and the employees of the places Vicky frequented, as well as the friend who had given her shelter and some witnesses and colleagues. Sergeant Brian Dunn, who was leading the investigation at that time, made several public appeals for assistance from the community. They needed someone to provide information that could be useful in catching the perpetrator. Vicky's family was devastated by the tragic death of the young woman. On that day, when her mother returned from work, the police were at her house. Her initial reaction was to ask if they had found her daughter and if she was okay, but when she received the news, she began to tremble. Until that moment, she was convinced that her daughter would reappear alive, and every contact she had with the police involved asking if they would help Vicky get off drugs once they found her. On November 13, Vicky's mother, Deborah, lashed out at the press for labeling her daughter as a drug addict. She emphasized that this fact was irrelevant and that the important thing was that she was a 21-year-old girl who had lost her life in a brutal manner. The following week, posters with Vicky's photograph were placed in various locations, especially in the places where the girl had been on the night she disappeared. In that same month of November, the police reported that they had spoken to more than 500 people and had taken statements from 150, including former clients of the young woman, taxi drivers, neighbors, and truck drivers. They also analyzed over 60 hours of closed-circuit camera recordings located in the areas the victim used to frequent. November was passing when Vicky's father, Anthony, and her stepfather, Colin, went together to the site where the lifeless body of the girl was found. On that day, Deborah's absence was notable, but the mother was too affected to participate in the ceremony. In addition to placing flowers, they prayed for any clues or information that would lead to the truth about what had happened. Anthony sent a plea to members of the community to help them find closure. In doing so, he stressed that they only needed a phone call to end the nightmare they were living, not knowing what had happened to their daughter. The investigation focused on the hundreds of truck drivers who used to frequent the parking lot in Middlesbrough. As part of the inquiries, a 39-year-old married man was arrested, but his identity was never revealed. Eventually, his connection to the case was ruled out, and he was released. In January 2002, the investigators in charge of the case arrested a 47-year-old unmarried man, identified as Eric Coates, who resided in North Yorkshire. This was the third time officials had interviewed him in relation to the case, as he had been unable to provide a credible alibi for his whereabouts on the day Vicky disappeared. The agents found it suspicious that he couldn't remember certain details precisely. The man admitted that he had been with sex workers, but denied any involvement in Vicky's death. He also revealed that 1 or 2 girls had mentioned to him that the crime was related to a drug debt settlement. His house, which he shared with his parents, was searched by the police, as were other properties belonging to his family. During the searches, officers seized computer equipment, clothing, diaries, videotapes, and a vehicle. Additionally, this individual had a criminal record. He had been arrested and imprisoned for 15 months in 1994 for unlawfully restraining and assaulting a sex worker in Middlesbrough. However, he was acquitted of charges of attempted sexual assault and indecent assault against the same woman. Ultimately, it was determined that Eric had nothing to do with Vicky's crime, and he was released. His father, a former county councillor in North Yorkshire, stated that they were as interested as the police in finding out who had taken the young woman's life. Years later, in 2006, Eric was imprisoned and sentenced to 14 years for pleading guilty to 15 sexual offenses against girls aged between 11 and 14 years. In this context, it was also revealed that his father had faced 12 charges of sexual offenses, but was not brought to trial due to health reasons. Returning to 2002, in July, Cleveland police questioned a man identified as John Taylor, who was serving a life sentence after pleading guilty to the kidnapping and murder of a 16-year-old girl in Leeds, West Yorkshire. The investigations into Jean also yielded no results, and he was ruled out as a suspect in the attack on Vicky. In December 2006, detectives from Cleveland Police reported that they had contacted their colleagues in Suffolk to explore possible connections between Vicky's case and the tragic deaths of 5 other sex workers. For these crimes, truck driver Steve Wright had been arrested, and 2 years later, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Subsequently, the authorities in Cleveland ruled out any connection of the man with the death. When the tragedy reached its 10-year mark, Vicky's parents visited the place where their daughter was found lifeless and placed flowers in her honor. Deborah told reporters that she thought of her daughter every day and that it was a pain that would never go away. In December 2010, the case file was once again examined, searching for possible links, such as a man identified as Stephen Griffiths, who had taken the lives of 3 sex workers in Bradford, West Yorkshire, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, at the beginning of January 2011, any possible connection to Vicky's disappearance was ruled out. For the family, the pain of loss was compounded by the uncertainty of not knowing what happened to her and the belief that the person responsible for her death remained at large. Vicky's grandmother, who was very close to the girl, was deeply affected and passed away a year later. Her mother, Deborah, passed away in 2015 at the age of 55 without ever getting to know the person who took her daughter's life. Anthony later admitted that during the first 24 months after the tragedy, he couldn't work and lost his job. He confessed that he couldn't smile, and it took him a long time to regain belief in himself and convince himself that it wasn't his fault. In 2017, the Cleveland Police requested a grant to fund 3 separate historic cases in the vicinity of Middlesbrough. A year later, the Home Office agreed to provide approximately £3.7 million, about $4.6 million at the current exchange rate, to fund the Historic Investigation Unit aimed at thoroughly reviewing unsolved cases. In addition to Vicky's case, officials also reopened the cases of Donna Keogh, who disappeared in 1998 at the age of 17, and Rachel Wilson, who disappeared in 2002, with her body being located in a ditch 10 years later. There were some similarities in these cases, such as the age and occupation of the victims, and the fact that all 3 occurred in Middlesbrough. In October 2018, a website published information that rekindled hopes of uncovering the truth about Vicky's death. The news referred to a high-profile convicted offender. The inmate had been a taxi driver and was responsible for ending the life of a 22-year-old office worker who went missing in March 2011, and her remains were found in a grave. According to the media report, at the time of his arrest, the man confessed to the murder of another young woman, age 20, committed 8 years earlier, and he provided information about the location of the body. However, no connection between the criminal and Vicky's case could be established. In September 2021, the police announced that they had significant new lines of investigation regarding the unsolved case. In this context, they made a fresh public appeal, urging anyone who knew any details about what might have happened to Vicky in 2000 to contact the authorities. The officers expressed hope because they now had more modern forensic techniques and plans to interview potential witnesses and examine over 2,000 hours of CCTV footage. During this time, one of the detectives on the case mentioned that in the preceding 12 months, a lot of work had been done on Vicky's case. He explained that a detailed review of the original investigation had resulted in 300 recommendations, with the primary one being to initiate a new investigation, leveraging advancements in forensic science. In the same year, the case of Rachel, mentioned earlier, was closed with the arrest of a 62-year-old man identified as Keith Hall, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison. In 2022, the investigators leading the case appealed to the community to collaborate by providing any information that could be helpful in solving the mystery surrounding Vicky's death. They were particularly interested in identifying the truck driver who was seen with the young woman hours before her disappearance. To achieve this goal, they released CCTV images in which Vicky is seen walking with a man in a parking lot on the night of her disappearance. And later, she is seen conversing with a truck driver to whom she may have left some of her belongings. This latter man was described as an individual with white skin, broad shoulders, aged between 34 and 38, and having a distinctive mark on his face. The police also launched a website with Vicky's name in an effort to gather information about the case. As part of these initiatives, detectives spoke with hundreds of people, and while they collected a significant amount of information, the identity of the truck driver remains unknown. That year, the family issued a statement reaffirming their deep love for Vicky and the difficult times they were going through. They emphasized that Deborah, Vicky's mother, passed away without answers, knowing that the person who took her daughter's life was still on the streets. On November 3, 2023, 23 years had passed since Vicky's lifeless body was found, and the investigation to find the person responsible for her death is one of the most extensive in the history of Cleveland police in England. Each year that goes by without justice is another year of suffering for the relatives of Vicky Glass, who would be 44 years old today. The police stated that in order to provide closure to the family, they need the support of the community. They are confident that someone out there possesses the missing piece to solve the puzzle and expressly called on that person to come forward to the authorities to help uncover the truth. Little is known about the early life of John Parker. It's scarcely mentioned that he was born in 1970, had at least one sibling, and lived in Indiana, United States. He came from a middle-class family and was always an entrepreneurial young man with a desire for independence, self-improvement, and a hunger to take on the world. Therefore, it's not surprising that immediately after graduating from high school, he sought ways to earn money and, according to his brother, his first job was as a waiter's assistant in a restaurant, though he didn't last long there. For reasons unknown, John became angry at work and quit. However, this did not deter his ambitions, and sooner rather than later, he found a new job that not only allowed him more independence in his tasks, but also led him to discover his true calling, sales. John began working as a door-to-door salesman for Kirby vacuum cleaners. Initially, his family mocked him, but in a short time, John proved to everyone that he had found his direction in life. In fact, by the end of his first year, he was practically the company's #1 salesman in the area and announced he wouldn't settle for just that. Working long hours, from 12 to 16 hours a day, he became not only a sales leader whose achievements were recognized at company meetings, but also a guide for other salespeople who found new ideas, inspiration, and a role model in him. It was during this time that he met 20-year-old Judy, a young girl who was born in October 1969 and lived in Texas in a low-income family of 3 children. She was very outgoing, and even though John was not looking to hire more salespeople at the time, Judy convinced him that she was the best in the sales field. Despite her young age, she was not a shy girl. In fact, she was a fully grown woman who, with her parents' consent, had married at 14 and was divorced with 2 children, Christina and Daniel Hicks, by the time she met John. John decided to give this determined applicant a chance and became her mentor in vacuum cleaner sales. Judy not only earned a place in the sales force led by John, but also won the heart of her boss, and sometime later, they embarked on a romantic relationship. John's life could not have been better. He had a well-earned reputation as an excellent salesman and trainer, and also had Judy's support in life and work. With these foundations, he decided to start his own business in Michigan, becoming a sales and service operator for Kirby vacuum cleaners. He also offered training sessions for salespeople, passing on his personal secret and the enthusiasm that had made him a star in the sector. His company was recognized as one of the top in the area, and John always highlighted that he had achieved this success thanks to Judy's support. In 1992, with his professional life resolved, the couple got married, and in the following years, they dedicated themselves to demonstrating what a good salesperson could achieve in life. The couple had 2 daughters, Tiffany and Erica, bringing the number of children in the family to 4. They moved residences several times, always to better locations, and the children began to enjoy the benefits earned through the hard work of John and Judy. Initially, he had no issues with his wife's children. Christina was a sweet little girl, and Daniel was somewhat hyperactive and mischievous. The Parkers enjoyed a good home, excellent schools for the children, high-end cars, and frequent vacations. John was amassing a significant fortune and didn't want to hide it. On the contrary, he used it as an incentive for the young salespeople he trained, showing them what could be achieved through hard work. However, as time passed and Judy's children entered their teenage years, problems began. Christina's choice of friends was terrible, as she chose those with the worst behavior and engaged in drinking with them. Allegedly, according to some sources, she also used drugs. Meanwhile, 13-year-old Daniel was not on a good path either and seemed to be angry and poorly accompanied all the time. On one occasion, while with a group of friends, Daniel took John's car and drove around the neighborhood, destroying many of the mailbox posts. The next day, John went from house to house paying the owners for the damage caused to prevent them from reporting the boy to the police. Around this time, John was also called to his stepson's school to receive a complaint about the boy's bad behavior. It appears that on this occasion, John ended up hitting the young man, which of course generated tension in the relationship. After 9 years together, Judy finally took her family to Texas so they could see the humble place where she had grown up and meet one of her brothers who still lived there. During this trip, Judy complained to her brother that her marriage was failing and that John mistreated her children. The truth was that Judy, far from recognizing that her older children were on the wrong path, sided with them, which of course heated up what seemed to be a pressure cooker. If everything was already bad, Things worsened when John began to suspect that his wife was being unfaithful with an employee of his company. True to his way of solving problems, John was not a man to sit and stew over a problem, but a man of action. To leave no room for doubt, he installed cameras in various parts of the office and finally obtained irrefutable proof that confirmed his suspicions. At that moment, John's world collapsed, and his previously cheerful and cordial behavior took a 180-degree turn. He began to drink, and under the influence of alcohol, he not only had terrible arguments with Judy but also became rough towards his children. His daughter Tiffany received a beating with a belt when her teacher informed her father that she had not brought her homework to school. When the teacher saw the marks from the beating the next day, she called social services to report the incident. Before they arrived, John made it clear to the 4 kids that if they wanted to continue enjoying the luxurious life they had been living up to that moment, it was better to say nothing about the beating. Indeed, Tiffany blamed her stepbrother Daniel for what had happened, and he did not deny it. However, John's bad mood didn't only affect his family. His employees and even the company's clients suffered from the betrayed husband's outbursts of rage. Seeking to put distance between his wife and her lover, he decided to move the family to an exclusive area in Crown Point, Indiana. Despite still being in love with Judy and hoping that by removing her from temptation they could have a fresh start, things did not improve. While Judy began to improve her appearance by losing weight and changing her look, John let his beard grow, started smoking, his wardrobe was reduced to jeans, and he was constantly distracted. The business suffered as a result of his state, ending up almost bankrupt and having to sell his boat to stay afloat. Rumors circulated in the office that Judy was having an affair with Jeff, John's right-hand man. Though it was unclear if the rumors were true, they undoubtedly fueled more disagreements. At a certain point, Judy informed him that she had decided to divorce, but it wouldn't be that simple. John felt that he had given everything to his wife, pulled her out of poverty, accepted her children, showered her with luxuries, and above all, loved her to the point of idolatry. With that same passion turned into resentment, he began to cut off all his wife's sources of money. He made it clear that if she left, she would leave with nothing, and his secret weapon was the recording of her infidelity with the office employee. This was the scenario at the beginning of 2003, and of course, the tensions between the couple affected the children, whose behavior went from bad to worse. Even Tiffany spent the holidays grounded because she and a friend had started a fire on school grounds. The end of the arguments came on Thursday, April 17, 2003, when John and Judy went out to dinner alone at a restaurant, possibly trying to find a solution to their situation, or maybe just trying to tone down the confrontation. After dinner, they called home to check on the kids and announced they would return shortly. At that moment, Christina asked them to stop by the office because she had left a school notebook there. Leaving the restaurant, they headed to the company, and John took the opportunity to bring the leftover dinner to Jeff, who was supposedly working late. The couple arrived at the office in a deserted industrial area just before 10 p.m. Both entered the office while John talked to Jeff. Judy picked up her daughter's notebook and returned to the car parked outside. Minutes later, John came out of the office and opened the rear door on the driver's side to search for something in the vehicle, when suddenly 2 loud bangs were heard and John collapsed on the parking lot floor. Instantly, the 911 received calls from Judy and the other from Jeff. As routine in such cases, police and medical assistance units arrived at the scene within minutes. Unfortunately, John, 33 years old, had been shot in the back of the head and was declared dead on the scene. Upon interrogating Judy, who was inside the car at the time of the incident, the woman could practically contribute nothing. She stated she was sitting there when her husband came out of the office, opened the back door on the driver's side, and immediately heard 2 detonations. Judy recounted that her reaction to hearing the shots was to hide, protecting herself with the seat, and when she lifted her head, she only managed to glimpse what seemed to be a man in dark clothing running away from the car. John's wallet was missing, so at first glance the incident seemed to have been a robbery, but the more the scene was analyzed, the more doubts arose in the investigators' minds. No one besides the couple knew they were going to be there, so a series of questions were formulated. Why would someone be looking to commit a random robbery in an industrial area that had no people in circulation at night? If it had been a robbery, why did they first take his life and only then stripped him of his wallet when in plain sight John was wearing a $20,000 gold Rolex and other easily accessible jewelry? Why hadn't the thief searched the pockets as criminals usually do in these kinds of assaults? More questions than answers. 2 bullet casings were found at the scene of the attack. This matched Judy's account of hearing 2 detonations. One of the shots ended John's life almost immediately, and as for the other, there was no official information. With their heads full of questions, the investigators began their work, and of course, the first person they took a statement from was Judy. She claimed that sometime before, her husband had had a heated argument with an employee of his company and identified the man. Beyond this, Judy could not provide anything more of interest beyond what she had said at the scene of the incident. Jeff was also not helpful. He was inside the office, and when he came out upon hearing the detonations, everything was already over. Meanwhile, the authorities contacted the Parker residence, and the call was answered by Christina, who was informed that her stepfather had passed away. With the robbery motive almost ruled out, detectives turned their focus towards John's circle, starting with the allegedly resentful employee. The man confirmed they had a significant argument but said it had been amicably resolved. Moreover, he had an alibi that was investigated and verified. The investigation then expanded to nearly everyone close to the young businessman. Business partners, past and current employees, competitors, and even John's friends and family. The only slightly suspicious finding was the interaction between the widow and the company's general manager, but there was no substantial evidence. Judy's demeanor during her husband's funeral was very intriguing. Comments mentioned Judy appearing cheerful and socializing with friends, in stark contrast to the expected mourning behavior. Her ex-husband, the father of her 2 children, was also noted to be comfortably reading a newspaper at the funeral. 4 days after John's murder, Daniel, 15, was brought in for questioning on suspicion of involvement. This suspicion was based on an incident 6 months prior, where police were alerted by gang members that Daniel had paid them to kill his stepfather, John. Although they said they never intended to follow through and had merely kept the money, the police deemed the story implausible, confiscating the money and filing a report without apparent further action. However, given John's eventual murder, investigators revisited Daniel's potential involvement. Under interrogation, Daniel confessed to paying individuals to harm John, intending not to kill but to injure him, like breaking his legs. Despite detaining one of the youth Daniel allegedly negotiated with, he was released due to a solid alibi verified by the investigation. Daniel was released after 9 days due to lack of substantial evidence and his minor status. Later, it was revealed that John had issues with Judy's children, leading to more investigation into Daniel and bringing to light suspicions about Judy's daughter, Christina, 17. Christina denied everything when questioned, and like before, the alleged plan led nowhere. Given that both teenagers had shown a desire to eliminate John, investigators wondered where the money for these schemes was coming from, suspecting Judy as the only possible source. Further inquiries revealed that the relationship between the couple had significantly deteriorated prior to John's death, with at least one of Judy's affairs coming to light. However, sources indicated that John had no intention of leaving his wife, and was seeking ways to salvage the relationship. The primary motive for Judy to target her husband appeared to be financial, with detectives discovering John had 2 life insurance policies totaling $1 million. Judy had attempted to claim this money after her husband's death, but the insurance company initially refused to pay, citing the ongoing investigation into his death. The payment was further complicated by John's father, who suspected Judy's involvement in his son's demise. Despite these leads, the case eventually stalled, with only circumstantial evidence available. Life moved on, but significant changes occurred within the Parker family household. Judy was hardly ever home, apparently busy with her new partner, Jeff, John's trusted manager. In her absence, the older siblings took care of their younger half-sisters, Tiffany and Erica. Months later, Judy and Jeff decided to move out of state with John's younger daughters, while Daniel went to live with his biological father. Christina remained in the house, now pregnant and with a boyfriend. Though the investigation had hit a dead end, authorities kept the case open, regularly revisiting the files in hopes of finding something substantial. Their persistence paid off when, following a new lead, they interrogated some schoolmates of Christina and Daniel, who admitted to selling them a firearm. This information led detectives to investigate a piece of family-owned land used by Christina for shooting practice. Upon inspecting the area, investigators indeed found several bullet casings. These findings were analyzed in laboratories, and a significant clue was discovered. The bullet casings matched those from John's crime scene. In 2007, additional information emerged through a colleague, a narcotics officer who had been tracking Christina's ex-boyfriend, involved in a drug case and arrested. Seeking leniency in his case, the ex-boyfriend disclosed a conversation with Judy, in which she mentioned that it was her son Daniel who had fired the shot that ended John's life. Confronted with this information, 21-year-old Christina, linked to the weapon used in the crime, quickly began to talk. She admitted to purchasing the weapon and calling her parents on the night of the incident, asking them to stop by the office under the pretense of picking up forgotten homework. She confessed to being part of a plan to kill John, with her brother Daniel designated as the shooter. When 19-year-old Daniel was located and detained in Arizona, he was presented with the new ballistics evidence and his sister's account. He readily admitted to being the one who shot John, but claimed that Judy, their mother, was the mastermind behind the plot. Daniel disclosed that Judy had forged company checks to gather the necessary funds to hire hitmen to kill John. The amount stolen was reportedly $7,500. However, when the initial plan fell through because the hired individuals took the money without completing the job, Judy allegedly instructed them to purchase the weapon for her son to use instead. Furthermore, Daniel revealed it was Judy's idea to create the pretext for leaving the house that night by making the call about the homework. He stated he shot John once in the head, and the second shot was an accidental discharge while he was rifling through John's pocket for his wallet, following his mother's instructions. He was also told to return home without alerting his younger sisters, a task facilitated by Christina, who kept the girls occupied with television. The siblings claimed their mother had convinced them to commit the crime by alleging they were victims of abuse by John and promising them a better life with more money and freedom. It was also revealed that this was not Judy's first attempt to kill her husband. She had previously tried to poison his food, leading only to a brief hospitalization for John under the guise of food poisoning. By the end of 2007, Christina and Daniel were formally charged with murder and conspiracy. Christina pleaded not guilty to the conspiracy charge and was released on bail several months later in March 2008. Daniel, then 20 years old, pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge to kill his stepfather and made a deal to admit his guilt and implicate his mother in the crime. In exchange for his cooperation, the prosecution agreed not to charge him with the more serious offense of murder, although he would still face a sentence of 20 to 25 years in prison. Daniel claimed that nearly a year before the incident, when he was 14, his mother and sister first asked him to help kill John. He detailed that his mother gave him and his sister money to buy a pistol, as well as providing him with black clothing, gloves, and a mask to wear on the day of the crime. She also instructed him on what to do to carry out the grim task, including taking a thorough shower upon returning home to eliminate any traces of gunpowder. Ultimately, Judy took responsibility for disposing of the weapon, the clothes worn during the crime, and her husband's wallet. Facing the inevitable in July 2009, 6 years after her husband's death, Judy surrendered to the authorities and agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, acknowledging her role in planning, executing, and covering up the crime. The prosecution requested that she be sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 28 years and a maximum of 35 years. Judy, nearing 40, was sentenced to 33 years in prison in late August 2009. The following month, Daniel was sentenced to 23 years, and in early October, Christina, who eventually pleaded guilty to aiding a criminal, received a 5-year sentence. Press reports indicate that Daniel was released in 2017 after participating in a community transition court program and chose to live a low-profile life thereafter. Christina served 4 years of her sentence and was released in 2013, but tragically, she died from a drug overdose shortly after her release. This case is marked by greed. Despite Judy's difficult early life and later success, her insatiable desire for more led her to commit heinous crimes. Sadly, her actions not only destroyed a successful entrepreneur, but also profoundly impacted her 4 children, leading 2 to prison and leaving the younger ones without their father and mother. Molly Bish was born on August 2, 1983, in Warren, Massachusetts. She was the youngest of 3 children in the Bish family. With her siblings Heather and John Jr., Molly was a bright, responsible, and dearly loved and active girl. The Bish family originally hailed from Detroit, Michigan, but they moved to Massachusetts in search of a better future. The reason for their relocation was a disturbing crime that occurred in their Detroit neighborhood. A young woman had been kidnapped on her way home from work and later found murdered. The Bish couple thought Warren would be a much safer place to raise their children, and this seemed to hold true for the next 15 years. Molly, always seeking new activities, had taken a summer job as a lifeguard at Commons Pond in Warren. She was excited about this opportunity as it was her brother John Jr.'s former job, and he had requested that Molly be given the chance to continue in his place. Molly was fully committed to her job and wanted to perform it to the best of her ability to make her brother proud. On June 26, 2000, Magi accompanied Molly to the pond for her 7th day of work. When they arrived at the parking lot, Magi noticed a strange man. He was smoking the cigarette and sitting in a new white car. His presence made her uncomfortable. She looked at him, but he didn't acknowledge her. Magi accompanied Molly to her lifeguard station and stayed a little longer, hoping the man would be gone when she returned to the parking lot. However, when she got back to her vehicle, the stranger was still there. They locked eyes for several seconds, and fearing for Molly's safety, Magi waited inside her car for several minutes until the unknown man finally left. On June 27, 2000, Molly's 8th day on the job, she and her mother stopped at a local store just before 10 in the morning. Molly purchased everything she needed for her shift as a lifeguard. When they arrived at the isolated pond surrounded by mostly woods, Magi dropped off her daughter, who hurried to her station since she was running a bit late. Molly arrived a few minutes later at her station and quickly set up her chair, towel, and all her work equipment, just after 10 in the morning. Swimming lessons were scheduled to begin soon, and she wanted everything in order to welcome the children. The beach was officially open, but Molly was alone, and it seemed that everyone was running late that day. No houses overlooked the water, and the beach wasn't visible from the road, which was located at the end of a dead-end street. In all directions, there were only trees. At 10 in the morning, Sandra and her children arrived to set up camp, followed by other families. They looked around for Molly but couldn't find her at her workstation. That morning, Molly hadn't used her police radio, which was part of her daily routine. Besides the open first aid kit, there was nothing to indicate that she had been engaged in any activities there. Even her shoes were neatly placed in front of her chair. When swimming lessons ended, one of the parents contacted Park Commissioner to report that Molly had disappeared, as it was uncharacteristic of her to leave her workstation unattended. The Park Commissioner arrived at the beach shortly after 11 in the morning, and at 11:44, he used his two-way radio to inform the police that the young girl had not shown up. He also examined her personal belongings left at the scene. From that point onward, some irregular events occurred that raised suspicions. At some point between noon and the afternoon, he ran into John Jr. at a hardware store, and for an unknown reason, he didn't mention that Molly had disappeared. Another irregularity was that the police didn't contact Molly's mother until 1 in the afternoon, 3 hours after Magi had dropped her off at her new job. Part of the reason for the delay, according to some accounts, was that people thought Molly might have gotten a ride to visit a friend, which was a logical assumption considering she had left her belongings by her workstation. Alarmed after receiving the call about her daughter's absence, the mother hurried to the location, where she found Molly's sandals, chair, first aid kit, radio, and lunch by the shore. However, there was no sign of her. Hours later, after the scene of the disappearance, and any potential evidence had been trampled by beachgoers, children, dogs, and curious onlookers who roamed freely, the police realized that their initial assessments might have been wrong. The first theory that Molly had simply gone off with friends made sense for an ordinary teenager, but not for someone as responsible as she was. So the second theory gained strength, suggesting that Molly had drowned in the pond. At that moment, it seemed the most plausible explanation. It's worth noting that Warren was the kind of small town where nothing much happened, and there were no records of violent crimes. With its picturesque houses and natural beauty, it seemed like a safe place to raise a family. In fact, that was the reason the Bish couple had moved there in the first place. Police investigation began with the basics, analyzing the teenager's belongings and work tools, and something chilling occurred. The unknown man became a suspect because all witnesses saw how he touched and examined everything within his reach upon arriving at the disappearance scene, without gloves or care. May J. informed officers that she had seen a mysterious man lurking around the pond in the days before. With this information, the county sheriff's office initiated an investigation. The local worker testified that he had seen the same man in the white sit-in, but he didn't see him in Molly's worksite parking lot. The car was parked near a nearby cemetery that was connected to the pond by a short path. On the morning of June 27, the day of Molly's disappearance, a truck was unloading sand for the beach. In the investigation, the truck driver was questioned, and he reported seeing the man parked in the lot a few minutes before Magi and Molly arrived. Police officers searched the pond and the surrounding woods but couldn't find Molly. Although there were no signs of a struggle at the scene, both the police and her family were convinced she had been abducted. The police focused their investigation on the unknown man in the white car, based on descriptions provided by Magi, and the two witnesses. A composite sketch of the man was created and circulated. He was described as a man with brown hair, dark eyes, and approximately 50 years old, possibly a heavy smoker since everyone who saw him mentioned he had a cigarette in hand. Simultaneously, a thorough investigation was launched, including the examination of local sex offenders to identify any matching the suspect's description, but no identification was made. The investigation into Molly's case became the largest and most costly search for a missing person ever conducted in the state of Massachusetts. The abduction gained significant notoriety and extensive media coverage. Following Molly's forced absence, her family created a website to spread awareness of the case to a broader audience. They also established an email chain to reach as many people as possible. Over 30,000 U.S. residents received emails about her disappearance. In 2001, Magi reached out to the renowned sketch artist, who agreed to create a composite sketch of Molly's abductor. The two met at a place, which are private accommodations in both rural and urban settings that offer bed and breakfast at rates lower than local hotels. They spent 9 hours chatting while they worked on the composite sketch. When it was completed, Magi felt it was accurate, except for one detail. She requested the artist to update the drawing to include a cigarette in the man's hand. The next day, when the artist showed her the updated result, Maggie was certain that the composite sketch was identical to the man she had seen. In May 2003, a hunter reported finding a blue swimsuit. He contacted the police because he had seen information about Molly's case and knew that she had been wearing a blue swimsuit when she disappeared. This lead turned out to be of great significance, and an intensive search in the forest began immediately. Tracking efforts, involving experts of various kinds, continued for several years. Finally, on June 9, 2003, Molly's body was discovered a little over 8 kilometers from her home. The official cause of death was not disclosed, but it was known that she had been murdered and buried in the dense vegetation on Whiskey Hill. The police continued their relentless efforts to find the person responsible, not just for the kidnapping, but for Molly's homicide. However, the case quickly went cold. In 2005, a man with a striking resemblance to the composite sketch was considered a suspect in an attempted kidnapping, but he couldn't be linked to Molly's case. In 2007, a registered sex offender was identified after attempting to abduct and assault a jogger just a few kilometers from Warren. He also matched the description of the suspect, but the police didn't press charges, and the reasons were never made public. In 2009, Rodney Stanger, who had recently been convicted of murder, became the prime suspect in Molly's abduction and murder. He had lived just a few kilometers from the town where Molly resided and moved to Florida shortly after her disappearance. Rodney also drove a white car, frequently fished at Commons Pond, and was an avid hunter in the area where Molly's body was found. He also fit the description that Molly's mother had provided to the police of the man she saw in a white sit-in. However, Rodney was never charged in the case as the police couldn't establish beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the perpetrator. After this significant setback, the case went cold once again. In November 2011, a confidential informant, who had been providing information to the Special Operations Group, became the new suspect. The individual, identified as Gerald Battistoni, attempted suicide while in prison after learning that he was considered a person of interest in Molly's case. Gerald also lived in the area where the teenager disappeared and had an extensive criminal record dating back to the 1980s. His DNA was analyzed in Texas, where he was serving his sentence, but the man passed away in November 2014 and was not charged with the crime. In June 2016, it was announced that enhanced DNA testing would be applied to 24 samples that had not yet been analyzed. A year later, in June 2017, investigators claimed to have found compelling information in the case. This information led them to a campground where the car allegedly used in Molly's abduction was supposedly buried. Multiple areas of interest were identified using ground-penetrating radar. The information was related to a new suspect who had lived at the campground around the time of Molly's abduction. At that time, he owned a white car similar to the one seen in the pond's parking lot. A witness stated that the man had told him something bad had happened and that he had been in the woods all night when Molly disappeared. He also reportedly had bloodshot scratches on his face. However, the man denied any involvement in the case, and it's unclear whether anything incriminating was found during the 2017 search. In 2019, new tests were conducted using more advanced technology in the hope of obtaining additional data to analyze the case's evidence. Investigators were hopeful that they could obtain a DNA profile with the new procedures, but the wheels of justice would once again turn slowly for Molly. On June 3, 2021, Worcester County District Attorney Joseph Early announced that Francis P. Sumner Sr. was a new person of interest in the case. According to reports at the time, it was not possible to arrest him because he had been found dead in his home 5 years earlier. However, the police received a verifiable lead that Francis was involved in Molly's disappearance. Because the investigation is still ongoing, authorities cannot provide many details about the case against Francis, but his criminal history is part of the reason he became a suspect. He had amassed a long list of crimes during his life and had served concurrent sentences for multiple abuses against women in the area where Molly worked. Police had received several tips about him over the years, and this time, the information given in the tips could be corroborated and verified. Francis had been convicted of kidnapping and raping a young woman who had gone to his auto repair shop in 1981. He was released on parole in 1998, just 2 years before Molly's disappearance. He lived not far from where Molly disappeared. He also resembled the composite sketch of the suspect. Unfortunately, he died in 2016 without facing charges in the case. Investigators continue to seek more information about him. When the existence of a new suspect was announced, the Bish family granted several interviews. Molly's older sister, Heather, told a media outlet that she believed investigators were doing everything possible with the information about the new suspect. As part of the effort to determine Francis's involvement, the police went to Ohio to obtain a DNA sample from his son, who was serving a federal prison sentence. This would enable them to conduct DNA analysis to establish a match with the deceased offender. Heather stated that someone like Francis, a convicted sex offender and rapist, should have been on the sex offender registry. This would have allowed them to approach him in the early stages of the investigation, and perhaps the case could have been closed with less trauma for everyone involved. In the same interview, Molly's sister pointed out that the conclusion of the investigation, which has spanned decades, would bring peace to her family. While they will always miss Molly, at least they won't have to keep trying to figure out who was responsible for her absence. Molly Bish's disappearance sparked the largest search for a missing person in the history of the state of Massachusetts. As of 2023, the case remains unresolved. The family believes they are nearing the end of the search for the culprit, although they are also aware that there is a very high likelihood that there may never be complete closure. Her killer has not yet been apprehended, but the case remains open, and the investigation is ongoing. A reward of $100,000 is still being offered for information leading to a definitive resolution. Molly's disappearance has turned her parents into staunch advocates for child safety. They hope that through their efforts, they can prevent other children from becoming victims of predators. It was just past 1 a.m. on May 14, 1983, in Orange County, California. Officer Sterling and Sergeant Jaguar were on duty on the San Diego freeway when they spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving really weirdly. They went to pull the car over, and that's when they met him face to face. They didn't know it yet, but they were looking at the most wanted killer of the last 10 years. The man stood there, spilling beer on the ground and with his pants undone. He agreed to take a breathalyzer test, which he obviously failed. As they were about to arrest him for drunk driving, they felt something wasn't right, like they were missing something big. Sergeant Jaguar checked the car and found something that would haunt him forever. A young guy in the passenger seat, lifeless. This was the scene that the killer hadn't recorded in his secret list, which had more than 67 victims on it, victims who had faced unimaginable horrors. Randy Kraft was born on March 19, 1945, in Long Beach, California. He was the fourth kid and only the son of Opal Lee and Harold Herbert Kraft. Kraft's father had moved to California from Wyoming weeks after the American entry into World War II. Upon finding employment as a production operative at Douglas Aircraft Company, he was joined by his wife and 3 daughters. The Kraft family lived modestly, and Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother initially found employment as a seamstress in a Westminster garment factory before later obtaining employment as a cook in a local school. Nonetheless, Opal Kraft always found time for her children. In 1948, the Krafts moved to Westminster, Orange County. Kraft attended Midway City Elementary School, where his mother was a member of the PTA. As a student, his intelligence was noted by classmates and teachers. By 1957, Kraft was judged intelligent enough to attend accelerated classes at 17th Street Junior High School. After finishing high school in 1963, he went to Claremont Men's College in the small town of Claremont. Randy was into a lot of things there. He joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps and got really into politics. In 1964, he even supported the Vietnam War publicly and helped campaign for Barry Goldwater, the Republican presidential candidate. Randy also worked at a local gay bar and was so busy that he started taking Valium to help with his stomach and headaches. However, over time, his friends got worried about how much medicine he was using. His grades started to drop. He began drinking, played poker all night, and even failed his econometrics class, which delayed his graduation by 8 months. 1968 was a big year for Randy. He got his economics degree and shifted his political views from right-wing to more democratic, even working hard for Robert Kennedy. That same year, he joined the U.S. Air Force, aced the tests, and showed he was really smart with an IQ of 129. He got sent to Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County, California, a place with high security. But in 1969, Randy's life changed dramatically when he told his family and friends he was gay. They accepted him, but the military didn't, and he was forced to leave. Feeling down, Randy went back to bartending and later became a truck driver in Huntington Beach. He also started teaching courses at California State University, Long Beach. There, he met Jeff Graves, a younger guy from Minnesota. They started dating, and it looked like Randy was getting his life back on track. But he had a dark secret. In March 1970, while wandering around Huntington Beach, Randy met 13-year-old Joseph Alvin Fancher, who had run away from home. Randy invited him to live together, which seemed nice, but he had evil intentions. After bringing Joseph to his apartment, Randy drugged and attacked him. Joseph managed to escape while Randy was at work, and a passerby saw Joseph's bad state and called for help. Joseph was taken to the hospital, where he told the police about being drugged and beaten by Randy, but he didn't mention the abuse. The police went to Randy's apartment without a warrant, and fearing for their jobs, they decided not to press charges, leaving Randy free to offend again. By the end of 1971, the police found an unidentified, decomposed body on Ortega Highway. The victim was Wayne Joseph Duquette, a 30-year-old bartender. The autopsy indicated he died from alcohol poisoning on September 20th of that year. The investigation stalled, with no leads on Wayne's clothes, belongings, or his killer. On December 26, 1972, police on Highway 405 in Seal Beach found 20-year-old sailor Edward Daniel Moore's body. He was tied at the wrists and ankles, had a hit mark on his face, probably from a blunt instrument, bite marks, and shockingly, a sock stuffed in his rectum. It looked like he'd been thrown from a moving vehicle. 6 weeks later, on February 6th, police found a man's body, aged between 17 and 25, near the Terminal Island Freeway. He couldn't be identified, but like Edward Moore, he had a sock stuffed similarly. Police suspected the same killer was behind these crimes, but the culprit remained at large as more victims appeared. On April 9th, 17-year-old Kevin Clark Bailey was found beside a road in Huntington Beach. He had been castrated and sodomized. 13 days later, another dismembered body was found and given the name John Doe. On July 30th, 20-year-old Ronnie Jean Wiebe was found strangled, with marks suggesting he'd been restrained and hung before death. The year ended with another gruesome discovery on December 29th. 23-year-old art student Vincent Cruz Mestas was found dead in the San Bernardino Mountains. He was openly bisexual. As with several previous victims, one of the victim's socks had been forced into his rectum. Mestas's hands had been severed from his body and were never found. By November 1974, 5 more victims had been found beside or close to major roadways in Southern California, 3 of whom had been conclusively linked to the same killer. 2 of these victims, 20-year-old Malcolm Eugene Little and 19-year-old James Dale Reeves, had each been found beside a freeway with foreign objects inserted into their bodies, whereas the body of the 3rd victim, 18-year-old Marine Roger Edward Dickerson, bore evidence of bite marks much like several earlier victims. On January 3, 1975, Kraft abducted and murdered a 17-year-old high school student named John Liras. The youth was last seen boarding a bus in Long Beach. His strangled body was found the following day, discarded at Sunset Beach with a foreign object protruding from his anus. Drag marks along the beach close to where his body was found suggested that 2 individuals had carried Larris's body into the water. 2 weeks after this murder, on January 17th, the body of a 21-year-old named Craig Jonadis was found discarded in the parking lot of the Golden Sails Hotel near the Pacific Coast Highway and Loynes Drive in Long Beach. Jonadis had been strangled to death with a length of string, possibly a shoelace. By January 1975, a total of 14 victims, whose bodies had been found discarded across 4 separate counties over the previous 3 years, had been linked to the same killer. All the victims had been Caucasian males with similar physical characteristics. On March 29, 1975, Keith Crotwell and his friend Kent May left home to hitchhike south, unaware of the fate awaiting them. Kraft lured the 2 men from a Long Beach parking lot into his Ford Mustang. The youths were given beer and Valium as Kraft drove in a random, aimless manner around Belmont Shore and Seal Beach. The police started searching right away, and soon they got a tip from 2 young people. They said they saw Crotwell and May in a black and white Mustang speeding into a parking lot. The driver quickly leaned over, opened the passenger door, and pushed May out onto the ground. He was almost out of it, probably from drinking or drugs. They saw Crotwell slumped over the driver's shoulder before the car sped off into the night. A month later, they found Crotwell's head at a pier near Long Beach Harbor. The police scoured the city for clues to find the driver. They eventually got a name, Randy Kraft. On May 19th, he was questioned. He admitted picking up Crotwell but claimed he left him at a cafe and knew nothing more. He also said his car later crashed and he had to call a tow truck. Jeff, still his partner, backed up his story. The detectives didn't believe him, but the Los Angeles County prosecutors wouldn't charge him due to the lack of evidence and because they couldn't find the rest of Crotwell's body or determine how he died. So, Jeff was free again. After a cool-down period, his crime spree just got worse. On December 31st, he kidnapped 22-year-old Mark Hall, tied him to a tree in a canyon, abused him, cut off his private parts, stuffed them into his rectum, burned him with a lighter on the chest, nose, and cheeks, gouged out his eyes, and then attacked him with a broken bottle. As if that wasn't horrific enough, Kraft suffocated Mark by stuffing leaves and dirt into his throat. When the police found Mark's body, they were shocked, and the autopsy revealed he was alive for much of this ordeal. This led the police to profile the killer as highly intelligent, methodical, and organized, possibly with military background, noting the use of surgical tape on several victims' noses, a technique used in the military to prevent body decomposition after death. On January 24, 1976, investigators from different parts of Southern California gathered in Orange County to discuss how to proceed with the search. Meanwhile, Kraft was living a peaceful life. In the following months, he ended things with Jeff Graves and soon found new love in Jeff Seelig, a 19-year-old baker's apprentice. They moved to Laguna Hills, promised each other forever, and shared a passion for threesomes, often picking up people from highways for this. During this time, Kraft wasn't violent, and it seemed his relationship had quenched his thirst for blood. He went nearly a year without committing any crimes until he struck again on December 10th, killing 19-year-old Paul Joseph Fuchs. Though Fuchs's body was never found, his name was on Kraft's list of victims. Kraft lay low after that, but on April 16, 1978, he strangled Scott Michael Hughes after drugging him with Valium and removed one of his testicles. Hughes's body was found fully clothed except for his shoelaces. On June 11th, 23-year-old Roland Gerald Young was found near a San Diego highway, mutilated and stabbed, then thrown from a speeding vehicle. 8 days later, the body of Marine Richard Allen Keith was found in Moulton Parkway, showing signs of being tied up, with strangulation as the cause of death and alcohol in his system. Despite ongoing efforts, police couldn't pin down the killer or save the victims, including Keith Arthur Klingbeil, a 23-year-old found beside Interstate 5, strangled with his shoelaces. At the hospital, they discovered he had ingested large amounts of paracetamol and alcohol and had burn marks on his chest. He died shortly after. On September 29th, Richard Anthony Crosby, 20, was found dead under similar circumstances along Highway 71 in San Bernardino, having vanished the day before while hitchhiking. The California Strangler, as the media dubbed him, had the region in fear, with every officer on alert for the next crime. On November 12, 1978, trucker Michael Joseph Inderbeaton's body was found near the San Diego freeway, castrated like the others. In addition to having been castrated, Inderbeaton had been violated with a foreign object and had suffered burns similar to those inflicted on victim Mark Hall 2 years previously. The cause of death was listed as suffocation. Kraft's attacks became less frequent, with the next one occurring in July 1979 on a highway. Donnie Harold Crissell, a 20-year-old sailor, died from acute alcohol poisoning, with signs of being tied and tortured. 2 months later, parts of 21-year-old British tourist Keith Anthony Jackson were found in trash bags behind a Union 76 gas station in Long Beach. A sock was found inserted in his rectum. Only Jackson's head, torso, and left leg were ever found. 2 weeks later, on September 14th, the body of 19-year-old Gregory Wallace Jolly was found in Lake Arrowhead. Jolly had been emasculated, and his head and legs had been severed after death. His possessions were later found in Kraft's home. On February 18, 1980, 19-year-old Mark Allen Marsh's body was dumped near Templin Highway, last seen hitchhiking to Buena Park. That summer, Kraft's job took him to Oregon, where he stayed in Portland and claimed 2 more victims. Michael Sean O'Fallon, A recent college graduate hitchhiking across the country fell prey to Kraft, who drugged and strangled him, his body found near Salem. The following day, Kraft is believed to have killed a man estimated to be aged between 35 and 45 years old, whose body was found beside a freeway in the city of Woodburn. Kraft forced him to swallow a toxic level of Valium and paracetamol before strangling him with a cord. In September, Kraft returned to California and resumed his crimes, this time involving Robert Loggins, with whom he took incriminating photos. These photographs, which were subsequently found in Kraft's possession, show Loggins in Kraft's living room slumped fully clothed on his sofa, apparently intoxicated, and in various nude, pornographic postures. All these pictures depict Loggins with his eyes closed. It is unknown whether the victim was alive or dead when they were taken. On April 10, 1981, he kidnapped Michael Cluck while hitchhiking, brutally killing him with 31 blows to the head after assaulting him, and dumped his body near Interstate 5 in Oregon. 4 months later, the partially clothed body of male prostitute Christopher Allen Williams was discovered in the San Bernardino Mountains. He had ingested several drugs, and a paper towel stuffed in his nostrils caused him to choke on his own mucus. By early 1982, the relationship between Kraft and Selig had become marred by frequent fights and episodes of temporary separation. In an effort to resolve their personal differences, the couple began attending weekly counseling sessions in Huntington Beach. These sessions began on June 22, 1982. Then, the brutality of the killings escalated. Raymond Davis, just 14, disappeared while looking for his dog in Echo Park. 12 days later, he was found decomposed under leaves, wrists tied and shoelace around his neck. Nearby, 16-year-old Robert Avila was found dead under similar circumstances. He had been strangled to death with a length of stereo speaker wire. Kraft is not known to have killed again until November 1, 1982, when he abducted and murdered a 24-year-old Modesto man named Arna Mikial Lane. Lane was last seen hitchhiking towards Orange County in search of work. His body was not found until January 1984, discarded on a hillside close to the town of Ramona. 4 weeks after Lane's murder, the semi-nude body of 26-year-old Brian Witcher was dumped from a moving vehicle alongside the Interstate 5 freeway, close to the city of Wilsonville, Oregon. Witcher had ingested high levels of both alcohol and Valium, but he died of asphyxiation. On December 3, 1982, 29-year-old Anthony Jose Silveira vanished while hitchhiking. 2 weeks later, his body was found, showing the same signs as previous victims. After this murder, Randy left on business, returning with Silveira's military jacket, ready for more victims. Before returning, he stopped in Michigan, staying at the Grand Rapids Hotel where he met Dennis Alt and Christopher Schoenborn. He drugged and assaulted them, then murdered Dennis by suffocation and Christopher by strangling him with a belt after inserting a pen into Christopher's urethra. Their bodies were found on December 9, 1982, in a field near the hotel. Kraft left Schoenborn's keys and Silveira's jacket in his room before fleeing. That month in Portland, he killed 19-year-old Lance Taggs by overdosing him with drugs and suffocating him with a sock in his windpipe. His body was discovered the following day, discarded alongside a rural road in Clackamas County, close to where the body of Witcher had been found just 2 weeks earlier. Eric Church, 21, last seen hitchhiking from Orange County to Sacramento, was found dead along Interstate 605, suffering similar tortures to Dennis and Christopher, but with signs of struggling against his restraints. He died from strangulation and severe head injuries. On February 12, 1983, Kraft killed 2 Buena Park men, 18-year-old Jeffrey Nelson and 20-year-old Roger Duvall. The two young men were last seen outside the house of a friend named Bryce Wilson shortly after midnight when they told Wilson they intended to purchase something to eat. Kraft continued these heinous acts, unaware that his luck was about to change dramatically. It was 1:10 a.m. on May 14, 1983, when Officer Sterling and Sergeant Howard spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving erratically on the San Diego Freeway in Orange County. They pulled it over and out stepped Randy Kraft, casually tossing a beer bottle onto the pavement. Officer Sterling noticed Kraft's pants were undone, which was really odd. He had Kraft do some sobriety tests, which he clearly failed, so they arrested him for drunk driving. Meanwhile, Sergeant Howard approached the Celica and observed a young man slumped with his eyes closed in the vehicle's passenger seat, partially covered by a jacket. Several empty Moosehead beer bottles and an open prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets were strewn around his feet. Howard attempted to wake the man. Receiving no response, Howard attempted to rouse the man by shaking his arm, only to note the individual had a low body temperature. Upon checking for a pulse, Howard noted the man was dead, with a ligature mark visible around his neck. Lifting the jacket from the victim's lap, Howard noted the victim's jeans had been opened to expose his genitalia. In addition, the victim's hands had been bound with a shoelace, and his wrists bore evidence of welt marks. Later identified as Terry Lee Gambrell, a 25-year-old Marine stationed at El Toro Air Base, the victim had been strangled to death. Searching the car, Howard also found lots of damning evidence: alcohol, tranquilizers, various prescriptions, and an envelope with over 47 eerie photos showing young men in explicit, lifeless poses. Plus, there was blood on the passenger seat, but it wasn't Gambrell's since he had no open wounds. Howard had a hunch they had caught the California Strangler. They took Kraft to the sheriff's department and searched his house, finding clothes and belongings of many young men whose bodies had been found over the years, along with more photos of unconscious or dead men. But the most shocking find was Kraft's coded list of 61 victims, including 4 double murders, totaling 65 young men. Gambrell was not on the list since his death led to Kraft's arrest. After matching the list with discovered bodies, the count reached 67, clearly indicating Kraft needed to face the harshest penalty. The California Strangler was charged with 15 murders between December 1972 and May 1983, after over 700 witnesses were interviewed and more than 250 pieces of evidence were presented. The trial began on September 26, 1988, where Kraft pleaded not guilty but was convicted and sentenced to death on November 29, 1989. Following a moratorium in California, his sentence was changed to life without parole. While his capture brought peace to the region, it left an unresolved question. Did he have an accomplice? Some details of Kraft's crime suggested he might not have acted alone. On one hand, forensic evidence in 2 cases revealed an extra set of fingerprints and DNA that didn't match the California Strangler. On the other, it seemed unlikely that Kraft could have moved bodies weighing up to 200 pounds alone, and it was even more suspicious that he kept them in his car for long periods without anyone noticing. Moreover, the photos Kraft had of the murdered men had to be developed somewhere over the years, yet no photo lab ever reported these images to the police. Initially, it was thought Kraft might have developed them himself, but he lacked a darkroom and the necessary skills. Suspicion fell on Jeff Graves, Kraft's ex-partner, but he died before the police could question him, leaving the mystery unsolved. However, a breakthrough seemed to come years later when Bob Jackson claimed to have the answers. After Dennis McDougal published his book, Angel of Darkness, about the California Strangler in 1991, Jackson contacted him, confessing to killing 2 hitchhikers with Kraft, one in Wyoming in 1975 and another in Colorado in 1976. However, authorities in both states said they couldn't verify these claims. Jackson insisted he knew more about Kraft, claiming Kraft's list only included the most memorable murders and that the real number of victims was closer to 100. McDougal reported this to the police and provided interview recordings. The detectives questioned Jackson but didn't believe him. No murder charges were filed against him, and he was eventually persuaded to check into a psychiatric hospital. Jackson gained some notoriety when his claims were published in a Beach magazine article in January 2000. Meanwhile, Kraft sued McDougal and the Angel of Darkness publisher, claiming the book tarnished his reputation, portrayed him as sick and insane, and hindered his future job prospects, demanding $62 million in damages. The lawsuit was dismissed as frivolous in June 1994, ending the fabrications of the California Strangler. Kraft is still in prison. Despite most of the bodies being found, 22 remain unlocated. The California Strangler shows no interest in aiding the investigation or expressing remorse for his actions. His sadistic crimes are as shocking as his ability to evade capture for a decade, instilling terror and leaving a bloody stain across California.